Welcome back after lunch. You're not too hot. Are you okay? Yes? Just making sure the temperature, when it gets too hot, start to make signs to me, and then we'll get the air conditioning back on. We're going to start today. We had, in a lot of the discussions, we had this idea of we need champions, we need successes. Well, this workshop this afternoon is about successes. It's about successful partnerships. So we're going to have 5 different illustrations of different types of successes between cooperation between corporate and startups. And I'd like to start with a first duo with a background in molecular biotechnology engineering, a PhD in neurosciences, the head of global business development and licensing oncology from Boehringer Ingelheim. So please welcome Dr. Emilio Erazo Fischer. And of course, a duo is a duo, so we need the startup. And here we have, with more than 20 years of international management experience with Sanofi and Guerbet, becoming CEO of Latin America for the group, joining Osé Immunothérapeutique in 2013 as CFO, and from 2016, the CEO. So please welcome Alexis Perol. So your collaboration is actually relatively recent, starting in April last year. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the partnership.
Yes.
How it works.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much, first of all, for the invitation and the organization of France Biotech. It has been a great meeting so far. I wanted to start very quickly, before going to the partnership directly, just to tell you a short story and introduce you BI a little bit, because I have realized that many of you don't really know a lot about BI, and I just wanted to share a little bit about that. So BI is a family-owned company. It was founded in 1885, so a long history already in Germany. Of course, we have a human pharma, animal health, and biopharmaceutical CMO business. We have around the world 50,000 employees, 2,800 of them here in France. And actually, a couple of years ago, we did a swap with Sanofi, where we got the animal health business, or Merial, from Sanofi, and we gave them our consumer healthcare business. And so for us, France is quite a very important site. One of our research sites in animal health, of course, is here in Lyon, in France. We have also research sites in the US, in Richfield, Connecticut, in Austria, in Germany, and in Japan. And last year, we have made 17.5 billion of net sales globally. And our management, and now I'm starting going into the part of innovation. Our management has committed up to 2025 about 20 billion euros in terms of research investment. That includes, of course, clinical trials and so on. But it reflects, how the company is it's looking at external innovation as well, including into this investment commitment. And what we want to achieve with this is to have a first-in-class and, programs with breakthrough potential, therapies to improve, of course, patient lives in different therapeutic areas. And we want to achieve this, and this is extremely important for BI, through external innovation, which, so far, actually 50% of our pipeline is anchored in external innovation, either in academic collaborations or partnerships, as we have with OSE. We are doing, we have a focus in external innovation in several therapeutic areas, such as cardiometabolism, CNS, respiratory, immunology, but also technologies that can allow us to go faster in terms of development and clinical trials implementation towards the market. And specifically in oncology, of course, we have a focus in targeted therapies or aberrant cancer signaling, but one of the most important ones, as other companies have, of course, is immuno-oncology, or harnessing the immune response on how we can attack tumors, finally. And we have an immuno-oncology focus, which includes tumor stromal targets, cancer vaccines, and oncolytic viruses, novel tumor antigen identification platforms that includes also the identification of neoantigens. And one very important focus is that we have myeloid cell modulating therapies. And this is exactly where OSE fits into the history of our partnership. And it's because we have seen at the beginning when we started the conversations with OSE, at BI, we were also increasing our capabilities and growing our team in terms of cancer, what we call cancer immunology research field. And the strategy at that time of immuno-oncology at BI was being defined by the new head of cancer immunology, which is Jonathan Sedgwick. And once that strategy was defined, at the same time that we started conversations with OSE, we realized that myeloid modulation was one of the stronger focus, and that's when something that was an initial conversation looking at very interesting scientific data from OSE actually took off, and we started having serious discussions at some point towards and being very serious of that we wanted to actually, like we said sometimes, get married, right?
Get married.
And what we saw from OSE, and just to finalize, I think it was very interesting for us that we saw from the OSE team their expertise in immunology coming from the transplantation field. And there also, at the time you were already a clinical stage company building more capabilities in immuno-oncology. And one key aspect of the partnership was now talking about specifically targeting SIRP-alpha of the SIRP-alpha CD47 don't eat me signal pathway, was that we saw development of an innovation of a monoclonal antibody made by OSE that was key for addressing the SIRP-alpha side of this signaling pathway. And it was, that SIRP-alpha is quite difficult to target because you need to be very selective. It has different variants, but you also need to target and have activity on different alleles because SIRP-alpha is it's a highly polymorphic protein or gene, and you have different alleles and you need to have this function. And this is something that we found through OSE, through their great scientific data. That was something that we were looking for. Also in terms of speed, we discussed it from the beginning that we wanted to, of course, not delay by transferring the program to a big pharma. We didn't want to delay bringing the innovation to patients and starting a first clinical trial, and therefore we discussed with OSE and having already an expertise in clinical development that we wanted to keep the project on OSE sponsorship to reach the phase 1 clinical trials. And you have seen maybe some of you on a very recent press release that we have started the phase 1 clinical trial, and OSE has dosed the first patient now in June. And I think, one aspect that I discussed with the team was that it was very impressive for them. Once we signed the deal, there were only 9 to 10 months that passed until we had CTA approval. And that was extremely fast, and that is something that we really value from OSE because it's a company that is really focused on advancing not only with the highest quality in terms of programs, but also with the speed that it's very important for all of us. And so we think that all this collaboration, also going to the clinic, has been a real partnership in terms of discussing. I always say that from the deals that I have worked on for BI, and I'm very serious about it, is OSE is one of the No, because you can think, okay.
We don't know what he's going to say yet.
you can also say, well, this guy is saying this everywhere he goes, right? Other partners.
With all the partners, with all the marriages everywhere in the world, but no.
But actually, OSC, I think it was during contract negotiations and during, we did also experiments together while we were putting the deal together. I think the team of OSC was always open for all the types of discussions that we wanted to have, and this was something that translated also when we closed the deal. And the partnership, the team is extremely happy to have that discussion very closely and very open between the two teams. And that's more importantly, how the two teams work together is the key for the success of the partnership.
So far it's a pretty successful marriage.
Yes.
So we're going to turn to the other side of the couple and find out how you live this marriage.
Well, I'm fine, thank you. No, it was very interesting for us. Obviously, we are strong at OSC, as Emilio very kindly said, to go from research, so target identification of very first-in-class innovative targets, and then building the right product, either monoclonal antibodies or bifunctionals or whatever, in order to bring them into the clinical proof of concept. And on the way, we need and we think that we can accelerate the development and give the best chance for these products if you find the right partner and a bigger pharma partner. That's very important for us. And what we really wanted to do with Boehringer Ingelheim is that, first of all, they have this footprint in oncology, which is very important. They have this worldwide presence, and they had their own anti-PD-1. I mean, there was some discussion this morning about this.
Right.
You need to have access to this anti-PD-1. If you find a partner who has it already, it gives you the possibility to keep the speed and accelerate in this. And as we know very well, as Emilio said, myeloid cells and macrophages, which are an important target and a type of cells in immuno-oncology today, and not so much worked on as people are more focusing on T cells. So we could, combine our knowledge and know-how on this and make sure that this wedding or this partnership is successful. So taking advantage of the expertise of Boehringer Ingelheim. I'll give you an example. I mean, when you have a due diligence process, sometimes people think that it's very difficult and it's boring, but by the questions you get as a biotech from the pharma,
gives you clues.
It gives you clues. It forces you to look for new things and better understanding. So you have to accelerate and you have to make sure that you're able
deeper.
To dig deeper, to be able to answer to the questions, and that's clear. And then as a biotech, you can go when you want to do a checkpoint development. So the product is a myeloid checkpoint. So the checkpoint development today, or big phase 1, big phase 2, this is not possible for us to do that. So you need the right partner who will be willing to invest the right resources in order to make sure that this product is a success.
Wonderful. So we've started with a successful marriage, and we're going to go on, hopefully, to find other marriages that are just as successful. I'm going to now ask, perhaps, Alexei, you can go and sit in the corner, and we can move on to second couple. So we have the vice president. It's like those TV shows with the couples, the husband and wife, and we ask questions of one side and the other. So we have the vice president of digital health and innovation at the world's largest biotechnical company, Amgen. In his capacity, he partners with the commercial brand teams to enable and accelerate Amgen's growth transformation using technology to enhance the patient journey. So please welcome Patrick Day. And joining Patrick, our next guest is animated with a passion for leveraging new technology to develop integrated solutions that improve patient outcomes. In charge of Epidemium, an open science initiative to crowdsource cancer research, as well as open innovation projects with top health tech startups and healthcare institutions to develop software medical device solutions. Please welcome the Pharma Development Director of Owkin, Jean-Frédéric Petit-Nivard. So, before going into the intimate details of your marriage,
not
January.
married We're not married yet.
You're not married yet.
Working on it.
Working on it. So, this is a different type of couple that we have. But it all started in your partnership in 2018, where you invested, Amgen invested in Alkin $11 million to scale the artificial intelligence platform. And perhaps, Patrick, maybe you can share how this partnership came about.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. Very excited to be here. I think this is an amazing show that you got here, and I'm looking forward to coming back next year, being married. So I think for us in my organization, one of the things that's really important is looking for partnerships. We are very actively involved in trying to find ways in which we can enhance or go beyond the molecule in looking for therapies for our patients. Amgen has a lot of firsts, a lot of good history. We have terrific therapies out there for patients, but I think we can all agree that just being on a therapy is not good enough anymore. And then finding patients that we need to get on therapy is even more important because of the system we have. And that's where these guys come in. So we partnered with them. They have developed a very innovative algorithm that's predicting second and third events for cardiovascular patients. And we're hoping, because of what they are doing in their space and our therapy for cardiovascular, that we can actually reach a lot more patients than we are today.
Fantastic. Jean-Frédéric, how has it been for your side of the deal?
So as a disclaimer, I've joined the company about 4 months ago, but I've heard a lot about the partnership because Amgen has been our first partner ever since the beginning. I think at the start of the project, the company, there was 2 people. Today we're 80. So it's a pretty successful adventure. And I must say, out of the people who started the project, what was really key was the team that was in place and how we managed to work together and overcome the first hurdles. You know, when you work with a big corporation, you have hurdles, and you need to stay focused. And now it's been like quite a successful journey. And I think what's been key as well is being very focused on the end goal. And as we see more and more drugs coming to the market, really, like you've said, Patrick, the idea is really how do we make this very concrete for patients and address patient needs, improve patient outcomes, leveraging new technologies, and that's what we're trying to do with Amgen today.
Great. So thank you very much for our second duo. We're now going to move on to our next pair of guests. We have with 20 years of experience in the insurance industry. In 2015, she became head of industrialization of the AXA Group Data Innovation Lab, and she is now the health program director of AXA Next. So please welcome Fanny Pouget. And to join her with 25 years of experience in strategy consulting for internationally renowned groups, leader of over 30 transaction projects, essentially in technology and software, and now the CEO of Diabeloop, a young company developing technological innovations for people with diabetes. Please welcome Marc Julien. So Fanny, AXA Next is a new entity created by AXA very recently. Perhaps you can say a few words about that.
So thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, and I will try to demonstrate how serious we are at AXA about innovation and in health, especially, and about the fact that we want to play a role in this space. So yes, AXA Next was created this year. It's an organization dedicated to innovation with dedicated resources, dedicated organization and setup. And actually, we have developed a buy, build, or partner approach to achieve an ambition, which is to develop new business models and new services beyond insurance. So that is what it is about. It's not about insurance. It's about being a player in the healthcare space beyond insurance. And actually, we discussed that previously, how big corporate work with all the startup ecosystem and so on. So we have different vehicles in this AXA Next umbrella. We have first a team which is dedicated to building these new business models and new services in this by partner built approach. And healthcare is a top priority for this team. We have also an incubator of startup, Camet, which has started the journey a couple of years ago, and now we have some promising startup part of this portfolio in healthcare, on teleconsultation, on occupational health. So this is something on which we have invested in the past, and they are part of the ecosystem. So I think we have entrepreneur part of our ecosystem in innovation. It's not only about bringing people from the corporate world and try to innovate, but it's really about having entrepreneur in this ecosystem. Then we have our AXA Venture Partner, our fintech fund, which invest in software, in technologies to support insurance business or asset management businesses, or they invest also a lot in digital health. And then we have AXA Partner, which is actually a vehicle that provide to a big corporate global solution for them to improve their customer experience. So it's a vehicle to scale, I would say, that we are using to help the business development of different partners or companies in which we invest in. And I would say once again, healthcare is our top priority for AXA
But
Next.
just to take a step back for a moment, why is health tech such a strategic priority for you?
So, as an insurer, we want to move from being a simple payer to being a partner for our customer, meaning that we want to multiply interactions and really help them on their day-to-day lives. That's why we think that we have the potential at AXA to improve and create customer adoption, and that we can play a role in this landscape.
And what sort of value will it bring the end customer, do you think?
What we see currently is that in digital health there is lots of now emerging business, from classic standard, I would say, teleconsultation to really access to digital platform. What we think is that we could play a role in coordinating these various care activities and organize, I would say, these care activities. So allow our customer, but the patient and the care provider to have an easier, I would say, experience with the healthcare ecosystem. So coordination, organization, and of course leveraging on all the digital players that have now developed a very promising and successful digital solution.
And is this where Diabeloop comes in?
It could be. So Diabeloop, for those who don't know, is an artificial intelligence that automates the treatment for patients with diabetes type 1. So I was hearing a bit earlier on the some of the discussions that artificial intelligence is
right.
Kind of a fade. Actually, it works, and we are probably one of the first artificial intelligence that actually does treatment automatically for patients, meaning that the patient nor the doctor takes any decision in its treatment. So it's all automated and based on artificial intelligence. And actually, more than that, it's a black box that actually takes those decisions. So we don't exactly know what comes out, but we have a controller that controls that the answer is good. And if it doesn't, then we go through another algorithm. And this is CE marked, and we're actually getting we just submitted our file to the French authorities to get the reimbursement at some point. So actually, artificial intelligence works, and it's not just about diagnosis, it's also about treatment and automation of treatment. And Diabeloop is actually a partnership from the beginning. First, it's a partnership between a doctor and a patient, and the patient is at the heart of our Diabo loop. And then the doctors couldn't find the technology to actually develop the system for the patient, so they went to talk to the best institute in France to do technology, and that was the CEA. So the CEALITY is actually our partner to develop that technology. And at some point, you know, we saw that it worked, so we went to look for other partners, and those partners were technology solution providers. So to work, we need a pump, an insulin pump that we don't manufacture, and we need a sensor that we don't manufacture. So we went to talk to those partners and to try to see how we could, you know, cooperate together on those. And it's hard. It's hard, and we'll talk about how we can do win-win situations, but it's hard. But we managed to do those partnerships, and now, so we've managed to get our CE marking, do clinical trials, be very successful in terms of clinical trials. We actually went to publish our results in the Lancet a month ago, so, you know, just to give you the success. And now we are, you know, on our path to do commercialization, and so we're looking for more partners to do that. And obviously, the first one in France is the PSAD, les prestataires de soins à domicile, and one of them is actually a shareholder of through their venture fund is Air Liquide, who is, you know, and we have again a partnership, and it's not always easy because, you know, we have some needs and we have a speed and decision making that is, you know, quite faster than the big corporations, but no, we understand. And that's
so you're
one
learning
of the
patience as well.
Well, the thing is, you know, one of the reasons why we started to be entrepreneurs is usually because we did have an experience in, you know, in big groups, so we understand how they work, and understanding, you know, how a big group and a big corporation works helps a lot to manage and to make the win-win situation. And so today we are developing more partnership with some distributors, and so when you are a startup, you need partners because you know that you won't be able to do everything alone, and the key thing is to find in each of the company, and thank you for your ideas, to say it that way, is you find a champion in the organization, a champion, somebody who's has enough power in the organization to make things move. You don't really need the CEO, but you need somebody who has enough influence and enough power within the organization to help you move inside the organization and to make things move at your pace. Because for us, as startups, a month is a world.
Eternity.
Exactly. Whereas for a big corporation, a month is a quick. Exactly, is a quick decision, right? So, so that's what's key. Because if the big corporation doesn't understand the speed of our decision, the capacity that we have to decide on the spot where they need to go through, then it will be complex.
And identifying that champion, finding that champion, is it a kind of hit and miss thing, or how do you go about it?
It is a hit and miss, but it's also through network. It's through those kind of events where you start discussion, and we just started, and we told.
This is how marriages happen. You know, you just meet around the coffee.
We were discussing, but yeah, absolutely, that's the way. And suddenly, for some reason, somebody is very interested by your technology, and you know, personal reasons or professional reasons, and then you know help you move around, and you know, and we have some partners that we started things with them, and we couldn't find the right champion, and nothing happened.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
We're now going to move on to our final couple, who's not a couple, but that's great because we only have one chair left, so that's good. No. Please sit down.
I work standing.
Oh,
so
you like standing? Okay, fine. So our next guest has 25 years of experience in business development and alliance management in the US and in Europe. Senior VP, Global Head of Business Development and Alliance Management at Ipsen Biolabs, where she oversees all global business development efforts to augment Ipsen's pipeline in oncology, rare diseases, and neurosciences. She also mentors and coaches female startup CEOs through the MassGen Next program. So please welcome Veronique So, Veronique, I think I should stand up as well, just to sort of be with you.
Duo now. So thank you for the organizers and Paul for giving me some time here. The reason why I'm standing by myself is because I'm going to talk about a story where we connect to more than 10 startups at once. And the way Ipsen has been doing this is by setting up an innovation center. So there's a whole story behind is I'm in charge of BD, so we can do the traditional partnering like my colleagues have been talking about, the one-off, the licensing, the collaboration we've done with MD Anderson last year. We can do acquisition. We acquired Clementia. That's a traditional way of accessing innovation. You can also do equity investment. We participate in funds like InnoBio or ARIX in Europe. But the size of Ipsen, in France, you may be very familiar with Ipsen, but around the world, maybe not. We cannot compete with giants like Amgen or Servier or Sanofi. We're 6,000 people, $2.2 billion in revenues. It's consequent, but it's not a large pharma. So how do we tap and connect with those ecosystems? Well, what we did is we partnered with Biolabs, and Biolabs is a premier incubator company that is for profit in the United States. They operate and manage multiple incubators around the country, East Coast, West Coast. They also incubate academic-centered incubators with Tufts in Boston, Princeton, New Jersey, or UCSF in California. And they also do non-for-profit incubators that is called Lab Central. So what we did is, as you probably heard from our CBO yesterday, Ivana Libic, Ipsen went through a series of transformation, and David Meek, our new CEO, decided that we really need to play to our strength. And that meant really having a powerhouse in developing and commercializing drugs. And we eliminated some of our pure discovery research activities. And in Cambridge, outside of Boston, we had labs that we decided to partner with Biolabs and retrofit and repurpose and made available for these incubators. So about 15,000 square feet of our labs, fully equipped, were part of this incubator. And the benefit to the entrepreneurs and the research scientists is all the space is managed on a day-to-day basis by Biolabs. But Ipsen shares space with them where they have access to our scientists, but also our commercial organization in either formal session, that are mentoring session, and it's very valuable because these are experts in the different fields, regulatory, clinical, statistics, but again, market access and commercial as well. BD, we also provide support for best practices and lessons learned in partnering. But also the informal sessions, because we have shared cafeteria, we have lounge seatings where we all commingle throughout the day. That's where the connection with the informality of truly building the relationship is started. Right. Because what we've learned is, at the end of the day, yes, money will talk, but it's sharing the vision and the passion of the science that gets you the first communication.
This needs human chemistry.
Exactly. And yes, I do coach and mentor female CEO, and Ivana also does that a lot because we both have been in startups in our career. And I think this is also a trend you see more and more is the fluidity between big pharma, mid-sized pharma, or startups is way more increased than 20 years ago. And so we help each other because you may end up on the other side.
Right. Right. Biolabs is part of Ipsen's innovation model. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the innovation model.
So we, as I said, we stopped doing pure research in oncology and other space. We still kept neurotoxin discovery. So to feed our pipeline, we completely rely on external innovation. As I said, we do the usual BD play, we do the usual investment play, but the Biolabs is pretty unique because that's the first time for Ipsen. I mean, J&J has done it in many places around the world before. This was the first time we were able to have this partnership where we offered the space, we offer the mentoring and the access to our scientists and our leaders. And in exchange for us, it put the reputation of Ipsen in Cambridge on the map.
Right.
In the US, Ipsen was not that known. But it also provided a potential deal flow for us because we're starting those conversations, but it also started to have this exchange of a biotech mindset. And we truly believe that when our scientists with those entrepreneurs and the researchers start dreaming together, miracle will happen.
And did you find there were synergies between startups?
It's too soon to say. Hopefully, yes. I think that there is this energy that you can feel right away. So we have about 10 companies by now. We started in spring. We opened officially the...
And how did you actually select the companies that you did select?
Very good question. So the criteria were pre-agreed between Ipsen and Biolabs. And of course, some of it is about the strategic interests. But we made it quite broad enough because when you're talking about early science, you don't know where it will lead. So it's not just oncology. It could be like other fields like artificial intelligence. It's applicable anywhere. So we have companies that are in the field of RNA therapeutics. We have companies that are in biofluidics for biomarkers. It's wide and broad in terms of the scientific scope.
And how do you see things developing in the future?
So we will have about 15 companies seated in the Cambridge Innovation Center, but we would love to open others, not around the world. We're not J&J, we're not Sanofi or Amgen, but again, to play to our strength. We're clearly here in France, we're in the UK as well, we're opening in Shanghai. We would love to do more of those models.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we're going to give the floor over to you. If you have any questions, any comments you'd like to make, very welcome. So who would like to ask a question? Oh, yeah. Get the ball rolling. Maybe we need to turn the air conditioning down. Any questions? You have a question?
We speak earlier about decision makers and find them in the company at the right place, so he will be able to push your project, but also improve the speed. So I'm coming from the biotech side. So I have seen that before. So are there other tips to share than these decision makers to just be sure that at some point we will realize this winning success?
Yes, if I'm...
Go ahead.
So I think, always when we talk with biotech companies, we try to be very open in what to tell them to improve the process of, going into a partnership, or at least getting into a state where you go into detailed discussions and finally you start a due diligence. And I think this is a very, very important point when you say to those biotech companies, what I need to do is to convince the one that will be the sponsor of this project, right? And as you said, I think it's key to find the champion. As I mentioned in our partnership with OSE, that champion from our side was the head of cancer immunology. And it was, again, I said that everything sort of fit at the right time and the right place, because at that time, Jonathan was starting, in cancer immunology and building the whole team, and he was very open to key innovation for his strategy that he was putting together. And besides that, we even had some past experience of many years ago, actually working in the SIRP-alpha field. So we found even internal experts that made the case to even convince more our champion that this would be something key for our pipeline to have. And therefore, I think it's absolutely. And I think my advice is to also for biotech companies to just come and ask, pharma, what do we need, so they can, also think about the specific story to put together to actually convince the sponsors that we need internally in the company.
I just have two comments. The first one is talk is cheap. So you really have somebody, an influencer, a mover, a shaker, when he or she is taking action for you, right? So promises, but at the end, deliver. So that's the first one. The second one is it's also about the science. With startups, if you don't have a strong champion or believer in your scientific story, you may progress, you may have a partnership, but it's not going to be as solid and really embraced by the organization. So science first.
Patrick?
So I think we take a little bit of a maybe a little different approach. One of the things we do is our organization, by the way, we have 45 different companies we're working with. So we're not, we have sites in Munich, in Berlin and Singapore. So we do a little bit of the same things, even though we're not Ipsen. We partner with companies also, and what we do is we're embedded inside our therapeutic areas. And so there are folks from my organization that sit with the therapeutic area leads, and they co-design essentially the programs that they are looking for. So if we're focused on migraine, then we're trying to find digital ways to get beyond the molecule, then they do it together. So we don't have to run around looking for champions, because they do it as in a coordinated way.
Right. Fanny?
Yeah, so what I can tell is that I think at AXA over the past year we learned a lot about and we were wondering, okay, we need to change, we need to transform ourselves to be really able to work with this ecosystem. And so we have organized this innovation apart from the big corporate, AXA Next, in order to be more agile. And we are facing actually with innovation the same kind of challenges that startups are facing working with big corporate. Meaning that when you are in the innovation team of AXA, of course you have to challenge your your group legal team. And AXA is a kind of M&A, the story of AXA, it's about M&A. So we have group legal, we have group corporate finance, and when they are looking at a potential business partnerships, so that's why we set up this, dedicated structure to really have processes which are not the standard processes that we have in our big corporate. And I think even in the organization, at group level, the group legal and so on, they are moving, and they are now used to work with this ecosystem. And the last point is that, as I say, we have now part of the team people that were entrepreneurs, that wants to have a corporate experience, and that will definitely go back to entrepreneurial. We know that, and it helps a lot internally to make things move.
Yeah, I think that's key, because I said that we used to be in big groups, and with my co-CEO, so we understand how big groups work. But it's great if one of the things is that if within the organization, as we said, they're champions, but also champions that understand and that have done themselves entrepreneurship. The other thing also is the big corporation needs to remember that the scales are different. So when they ask us startups things, they need to remember that €1 doesn't represent the same amount for them and us. A week is not the same kind of timing for them and us, and so yes, they can strengthen their muscles and that make us twist our arms to accept things, but it's not win-win in that case. It's actually win-lose, and at some point we'll be big, and we'll remember that.
So we really need people to understand each other. Yeah. Any questions, comments? Come on, you have this fantastic, wonderful opportunity to ask questions. Yes, here we have one.
Hello. I would like to thank the panel, first of all, for your shares. I have a questions about the companies that are relying more and more on external partnerships. How do you maintain your added value? Because I think successful partnership is not only about money and exposure. So in the long term, how do you maintain this added value?
So I had also alliance management, right? And so I'm completely a believer that signing the contract is not the end, it's just the beginning. And everybody's going to say, I'm the partner of choice, but the proof is in the pudding. It's when you actually live day in, day out. It's how you behave. It's how you amend the contracts, it's how you deliver the products. That's where you really see the great partnership. So I can only advise, and we had this conversation earlier, is do the due diligence also on the future partner from both sides. Are you going to be liking each other? Do you like how they think? Do you like how they make decisions? Because if it drives you crazy already through the negotiation, guess what? It's going to drive you crazy for many years. So just to give you a testament, yesterday we just kicked off, we announced it last week, we have a partnership with Debiopharm for 35 years. Guess what? We just re-signed for another 15. For me, that's the testament of, it may not be a startup, but of a very long partnership where both believe that it's still very important to continue to work together and that you do need each other. So I'm a completely firm believer.
And maybe, sorry, that's loud. Just a comment on everything that has been said. I think in the end, it's a strong willingness to accept the change within the organization. And that, of course, you need support from the top leadership, because anything that has been structured within a big corporation could be transformed in some way with these new approaches. And unless you have both the buy-in from the top management and the people within the team who have this mindset and who are able to challenge the status quo, eventually you'll get blocked and the project will be killed. And I think what makes a great partner is actually having the people within the organization who have this mindset and who are able to, in front of a difficulty, to think out of the box and say, okay, we're going to find a solution, instead of saying, no, it's a dead end. Please turn around and go back.
Just to build on that, I think there is hope, and what Emilio was saying is that we decided, talking to each other, first of all, that the more you talk to each other, even if you have negotiation, due diligence, questions, difficult questions, and so on, at one point you want to do the partnership, and you know that if it goes well, then it will go well after you sign the contract. And the other thing is that I think it's the first time that for Boehringer Ingelheim, a biotech was responsible or is responsible for going into phase 1, and we demonstrated that we are able to do that. And my understanding is that based on this, it might not be the last case for this, and so everybody took advantage of that and profit from that.
So I think everybody that works putting together partnerships, we usually say that it's better to regret a partnership that you don't sign than regretting a one that you did sign, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, everything I've said, you realize before putting the ink into the contract that at some point maybe you are having a discussion with someone that is not really a good fit or a perfect fit on what you were looking for. And I think you need to be very transparent, but also very courageous in taking a decision when you say, no, this is not for both sides the right thing to do.
It's not a win-win,
yeah. Right? Mm. But in terms, when you have an agreement and you are absolutely sure that this is going to work at the beginning, you are right in your question, but saying you need to keep that relationship alive, during the years. And I think that's the openness of both sides to actually go into new areas, enlarging, as you said, partnerships, looking for new areas to do research together or to address new possibilities of where an initial therapy maybe was thought about, then you realize that you can expand this. And I think this is key because it keeps a partnership in a very dynamic way looking into the future.
Patrick?
So, at Amgen, I think we do a lot of partnerships. We have an excellent BD team. In fact, there's some BD folks back there who lead this. I would say that this is a very unique example of a partnership because they are building a product we know can transform the lives of a lot of people, millions of people. Cardiovascular is still the single largest killer in the world. $600 billion just in the U.S. So if we're able to work with this team, and it's not easy, I don't think anything we're doing is easy because we're basically treading in areas we've never tread in before. So, who owns IP? Who owns the product? How do we do all this? All this stuff's got to get worked at the same time while the algorithms are being developed and we're trying to identify patients. I think if you have the connections that you forge along the way and be open, as he just indicated next to me, be transparent. If it's not working, just tell them it's not working, and what you can do to fix it, it'll work.
Yeah, and just to share with you, yes, some trick in how we express things internally. Of course, there is all the tricky discussion on IP, on financial, and so on. But we used to say, okay, where are we with the creation of love, actually? And it's about love, and we always that's the way we when we have the internal discussion and so on. Where are we with love? And it's about this long story that we want to build, which is at the heart of the partnership.
Fantastic.
It is indeed like, in a real partnership, it is about the dialogue, but it's also when things do not go well. And in science, it happens a lot, especially at the early stage. It's to talk about it,
Right.
don't hide, share the challenges, and resolve together, rather than toss it over the fence or hope that it will disappear.
Yes, because I was going to say, when you're talking about the excitement and the energy that I can imagine of a hub, I would imagine there could also be tensions and there could also be disagreements, in which case it would be hell to be together, as it were. So you have to have strategies of working out when things don't go well. So you've got to be able to talk about it.
And Paul, just last, I think human relationships are key, and one thing that we do, and probably we are not unique on this, but when we start a due diligence to put together a partnership, we involve almost from the very beginning that person or that team that would actually take and internalize the project, if it's a specific asset, of course, into the, and they will work it out in the pipeline and be the main contact of the partner through the whole partnership and the collaboration. And I think this works very well because it's all building human relationships from the very beginning, even before we again sign the contract. It's allowing also the teams to get to know each other, to start working already in the due diligence. If you have an MTA and you start doing experiments and you discuss on both sides, I think that's something key. And I think at the end, everything is interconnected. Another thing that we are trying to do at BI is to meet potential partners from very early stages. And we are doing something similar that you mentioned at Ipsen. And it's that we have a program which is called Grassroots Initiatives. And we have, in cities in the US, in Boston, in San Diego, in San Francisco, in New York, but also around Europe. And here in France, we have started already in Lille and Lyon. And hopefully we do something similar in Paris. But also in the UK, in London, Cambridge and Oxford. In Heidelberg, we have done in Austria, in Vienna. We are doing something that is called BI Office Hours, and it's a mentorship for biotech companies. And why I'm coming back to this is because you were asking, how companies can get to know more what pharma is looking for, but not only in terms of assets or a specific, scope of collaborations, but also on how do you get to those champions inside the companies. And in those mentorship sessions, we actually try to do exactly that. We try to tell small biotech and mostly startups, which are, don't have a great experience like companies like OSE had at the time, but they are just starting and they don't know too much about how pharma works. And we are trying to give them those tools from the very beginning, and those is what we call planting the seed to maybe have actually a great relationship with one of them if we enter into a partnership later in the future. Yeah.
Totally. Any other questions? Yes. Cédric.
Yeah, thanks for the very good panel. You talk about transparency, the way you interact between the pharma and the biotech to make it happen, and having great success together. What I experienced in the past is a lack of transparency for external communications, and sometimes is something very frustrating for the financial community because we discussed with the CEO of the biotech company on the main lead product partner with the big pharma, and we ask them question, and most of the time is, we cannot say anything. All the communication is controlled by the pharma, and so and even sometimes in due diligence we have some difficulties due to access to that. So we are all aware that we have to keep some confidentiality and so on, but I think it will be also important to be sometimes more open and to improve external communication. So it's an open question, I don't know, but it's really something
Patrick is just dying to answer that question.
I think you're spot on. So one of the things I know that, so in our company, you know,
just,
a lot.
Usually when we ask to pharma is, don't worry, it's very backloaded. And when we discuss with biotech, see, you have seen we optimize the upfront payment. But then between the both, we don't know.
Yeah, so one of the challenges you have in this environment is we are doing very innovative things. And I think public companies, large public companies, small public companies, anybody who's a public company needs to be careful how they craft a communication because it has very material effects on the overall standing of a company. You know, you're seeing here people who run Alliance and BD. So if you go out and start talking about stuff before you actually have anything to show for it, it can cause tremendous shareholder problems. So while I agree with you 100%, it's something we are all navigating. I know we are really working hard. Just being here for me, you know, we have to get permission to do this. So I have to go through a process that allows me to come here to talk about it. And since I'm a public company, if I say anything wrong, those folks behind me, you know, will record it and post it somewhere, and then I'm in trouble. So that is the transparency that we are trying to get past.
There's also, I mean, let's put it on the table, the dynamic tension between the startup or the company wanting to announce everything, right, and inflate the biobucks, right, versus us trying to keep the lid on the deal terms because we're competing and there's fewer of us, right? So you have a disbalance. And so, yes, we may relinquish the upfront sometimes. We try not to. We may try to be doing just a package. We may give you some signals to appease you that we didn't do something totally crazy. But we just, you know, the promise you see in certain field, the terms we have to offer are quite, you know, large. And so it's another way for all of us collectively trying to tone down a little bit the expectations. And we succeed in some areas, in others we don't. And you have one outlier and boom, it lights up, right? So,
you know, I think that the one reason is we don't know. I mean, you know, a partnership is not signed until it's signed and until it's started. And sometimes people are asking us questions about, you know, how things are going, and you know, you can't say because there's nothing to say about. And as startups, of course we need to communicate and we need to give some information, but the last thing we want also is to provide information that is actually erroneous and that is, you know, and so we need to keep that confidential until, you know, it's open and people can have the know of it. And the other thing also is that we all are regulated. You know, our industry is very regulated. We can't say a lot. You know, lots of things is really, you know, under, you know, the protection of the you know, the patient's information. The you know, for example, for the moment we have our files that is at the HIS, and everybody's asking me when I'm going to get the reimbursement. And you'd love to have that. Well, first, I don't know. And second, even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you because, you know, I know that if I start saying something to you, then the authorities are going to go back on me and say, you know, why did you talk? And why did you started to give a price? And why did you, you know, because, you know, if I start talking, then I know I'm going to get in trouble, and not just because I'm public, but just because, you know, it's the fact of things. You know, yes, my clinical trials are success, but guess what? The Lancet doesn't want me to tell anything before it's published. And if I start saying something outside, I can't be published in the Lancet, and the value of being published in the Lancet is enormous. So first, sometimes I don't know, and I can't provide you with the information because I don't know. Yes, I've started a process to get reimbursement, you know, but I have no idea and no clue when it's going to be done. And second, if I give you the information, then it actually can backfire, even if I'm not public. You know, even being private, I can be backfired. For example, when I was having my audits for my CE marking, everybody was asking me when was it going to be delivered. But guess what? I sort of knew when it was going to come. But if I were to give you the information, then the auditor will feel the pressure to give the right or, you know, yes or nay, and I don't want that. So, you know, things have to be private, you know, until it's open.
And that's why you're an investor, I guess. You're taking risks. You don't have the full picture, or else there would be no use of having people like you investing in companies, I guess.
But that said, that's the outside world. But for example, at our board, we give all the information and we provide all the information to our board members and of course to our investors. But outside of that, you know,
Closed circle.
Yeah, outside of the circle, you know, there's no way we can give information out. And the last thing, of course, is the patient, because if you start giving out information and giving hope to the patient that something is going to happen, and it takes 6 more months, you know, that, you know, yes, the business, yes, the value of the business may change. Yes, you may have problems with the regulatory people, but really at the heart of it is the patient. And if you start providing the patient some false hope on what's going to happen, you know, you're doing your right job. So you need to make sure that when you provide information, you know, you're spot on.
Any other questions, comments? Well, then we can thank our panel very, very much. Thank you. And back in a half an hour at 3:45. We have a break. Yes. Thank you. Excellent. I'd love to play that game for couples, you know.
Let me be the one you come running to. dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair, warm smell of colitas rising up through the air. Up ahead in the distance, I saw shimmering light. My head grew heavy and my sight grew dim. I had to stop for the night. There she stood in the doorway. I heard the mission bell, and I was thinking to myself, this could be heaven or this could be hell. Then she lit up a candle and she showed me the way. There were voices down the corridor. I thought I heard them say, welcome to the Hotel California. Such a lovely place, such a lovely face. Plenty of room at the Hotel California. Any time of year, you can find it here. Her mind is still funny twisted. She's got the Mercedes Benz. She's got a lot of pretty, pretty boys she calls friends. How they dance in the courtyard, sweet summer sweat. Some dance to remember, some dance to forget. So I called up the captain, please bring me my wine. He said, we haven't had that spirit here since 1969. And still those voices are calling from far away. Wake you up in the middle of the night just to hear them say, welcome to the Hotel California. Such a lovely place, such a lovely face. Living it up at the Hotel California. What a nice surprise. Bring your alibis. Mirrors on the ceiling, the pink champagne on ice. And she said, we are all just prisoners here of our own device. In the master's chambers, they gathered for the feast. They stab it with their stealing knives, but they just can't kill the beast. Last thing I remember, I was running for the door. I had to find the passage back to the place I was before. Relax, said the night man, we are programmed to receive. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
We can just hold on to each other's hands. This time might be the last I fear, unless I make it all too clear. I need you so. Take these broken wings and let it fly again, let it live so free. When we hear the voices say, the book of love will open up and let us sing. So take these broken wings. Baby, I think tonight we can take what was wrong and make it right. Baby, it's all I know that you have of the flesh and blood makes me whole. I need you so. Take these broken wings and let it fly again. Let it live so free. When we hear the voices sing, the book of love will open up and let us in, yeah. And let us in. We'll open up. Baby, it's all I know that you have of the flesh and blood makes me whole. So take these broken wings and let it fly again. Let it live so free. When we hear the voices sing, the book of love will open up and let us in. Take these broken wings. You gotta let it fly, let it live a love so free. When we hear the voices sing, the book of love will open up for us. And
Emotion in my foolish lover's game. On this endless ocean, finding lovers know no shame. Turning and returning to some secret place inside. Watching in slow motion as you turn around and say,
You really get me now. You really get me now. your mom is good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. One of these mornings, you're gonna rise up singing. Then you'll spread your wings and you'll take to the sky. But till that morning, there ain't nothing can harm you. With Daddy and Mommy standing by.
come together. Come together. Come together.
So welcome back after the break. We are now going to look at the best practices in the American entrepreneurship model in healthcare sciences. And to host this roundtable, we have the Chief Commercial Officer and Vice President Business Development at Abivax, equally Vice President at France Biotech, and President of the Chicago Booth Alumni Club of France. So please welcome Pierre Corteil.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Please stay.
I think it's a very good topic we are going to tackle today. And I've asked my friend from the University of Chicago to come here and to talk about entrepreneurship and the best practices. When we talk about entrepreneur, it sounds French, actually. And I look in the Investopedia, and I found the definition very good. This is, entrepreneur is a French word coined by the economist Jean-Baptiste Say, and usually is translated as adventurer. I think it rings the bell for some of you. Jean-Baptiste Say studied Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations, and while agreeing on all points, found that the omission of entrepreneur or enterprising businessman was a serious flaw. And then Say pointed out in his own writings that it was entrepreneurs who sought out inefficient uses of resources and capital and moved them into more productive, higher yield areas. Simply put, entrepreneurs seek opportunities for profit and by doing so create new markets and fresh opportunities. I think this is something which talks to you. So today we are talking about biotech and the health tech world, and entrepreneurship is at the center of the health tech ecosystem, as you know. And health tech companies require expertise from basic to translational scientists, expertise from new venture entrepreneurs, from venture capitalists, and more. And I'm delighted to welcome the panel that will talk about that. So Melody Schwartz and Jeffrey Hubel. So Melody and Jeffrey are please come on the. Melody and Jeffrey are researcher, professor at the University of Chicago, as well as successful serial entrepreneurs. Sophie Kornowski. Sophie was previously head of partnership at Roche, and she is now senior partner at Gurnett Point Capital, based in Boston. Star Marcello. Star is a deputy head of Polski Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, an assistant professor of entrepreneurship at the University of Chicago. And last but not least, Gilles Bayen. Gilles is a serial entrepreneur, the chairman and CEO of Erytech Pharma, which has a dual listing at Euronext and Nasdaq. So I will ask you in like 2 or 3 minutes to introduce yourself a little bit more in detail. Jeff, if you can start.
Yeah, happily. My name is Jeff Hubel, as was mentioned. So I'm trained as a chemical engineer, work in the biotech world, specifically in the areas of regenerative medicine and immunology, translational immunology, at the University of Chicago. So I'm part of something called the School for Molecular Engineering at the University of Chicago. So the work that we do in my research laboratory at the University of Chicago is rather translational, yet focused on development of new molecules. So since we're interested in developing new molecular entities as candidate drugs or to pose a mechanism, and then as a candidate drug, that gives rise to the opportunities for entrepreneurism rather easily. We're always patenting these new molecules and then looking for ways to drive them forward to hopefully have clinical impact.
Melody?
Hello, I'm Melody Swartz. I'm trained as a chemical engineer, but I consider myself a bioengineer. I started my career at Northwestern University, where I was an assistant professor of bioengineering, and then moved to EPFL in Switzerland, where I was for 12 years, moving up to the director of the institute. of bioengineering there. And then we moved to University of Chicago when this opportunity came up when they started a new engineering school. My research is all in translational oncology, specifically tumor microenvironment. I do both basic and translational research. And together with Jeff, we started a company called AeroImmune that's all focused around clinical immuno-oncology.
Then we also started a company called Enochion, which is headquartered in Switzerland, but the research and development efforts are located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is about 50 people focused on the fields of immunological tolerance in multiple sclerosis and celiac disease.
So I'm Gilles Beyen. I'm also a bioengineer by training in Belgium. Worked a couple of years in that field, did then my MBA at the University of Chicago. And from then I've been in biotech, first consulting, then I founded a biotech company in the cell therapy space, the first in Europe to get an approval. It was TiGenix, it was in the cartilage space. It was the first cell therapy in Europe to get a European approval. And this company now is in the hands of Takeda, so it's now a Japanese company. I then moved on to Erytech, and Erytech is a company in Lyon, and it works around red blood cells, so erythrocyte technology. And what we're doing is we put molecules into red blood cells, which make them longer acting, which makes the molecules longer acting and less, and we can less toxic. And we've advanced this first in leukemia, but now the big bet is on a phase 3 study in pancreatic cancer, phase 2 study in triple-negative breast cancer. And all of this requires a lot of money, so we first went public, this was already in 2013 in Europe, in Paris, in Euronext. But in 2017, having to fund these studies, we went public on NASDAQ. So we're now double listed. And also, because of the importance of this whole US dimension for us, I, last month or 2 months ago, moved from Lyon to Boston. But I'm still sort of in both areas.
Thank you. Star?
Hi, I'm Star Marcello. I am not a bioengineer, but I do have my MBA from the University of Chicago as well. I have spent the last 14 and a half years building the entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem at the University of Chicago and in the Chicagoland area. So as Pierre mentioned, I'm the deputy head of the Polsky Center, which is our entrepreneurship and innovation center at the university that works with faculty on their translational science and getting that science out into the world to make an impact and helping with tech transfer and those types of opportunities. I also manage student-based entrepreneurship and innovation and help students launch new ventures out of the school. We've had a huge project underway to really advance what's happening in Chicago and to make the University of Chicago similar to its peers that you think of as being well-known as tremendous in this area, Stanford, MIT, Harvard to some extent, and others. And so it is exciting to see a panel like this come together, and I hope that I can provide some perspective on how to use universities to really transform an entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Thank you, Star. Sophie?
So I'm Sophie Kornowski. I'm a doctor in pharmacy from Paris, so I'm the French representative here. And I have 20 plus years in business, so I was in big pharma, Abbott, Sanofi, Winthrop, and Merck, and as well Roche for the past 12 years. I was head of the French affiliate, and then I was head of Roche Partnering based in Basel, acquiring pharma companies as well as healthcare IT companies for the Roche Group. And I have my MBA from University of Chicago, which was transformational in many ways because you go from doing pharma to doing business, which is dramatically different, especially with the finance focus that exists at University of Chicago. And for the past 12 months, I've joined the Gurnett Point Capital Fund, which is Ernesto Bertarelli, the founder of Serono, a fund of $2 billion based in Boston. I am the partner of Chris Wiebacher that many of you must know. And what we do, we're a private equity fund. What we do is we buy companies and then we manage them, or we take majority, and we're an active investor. So we're always scouting for new companies, and then it's great fun because we get involved and help a product to develop, to launch. So this is a really exciting time in the biotech field.
Thank you. So the first topic I would like to address is success and failure. On a global basis, 90% of startup fails. That's the first point. When we are talking about a clinical trial, a product in phase 1 has a likelihood of approval of only roughly 10%, and a product in phase 2, a likelihood of around 15%. Also, that's the first question I would like to ask to start, because Waverly Dutch, who is a clinical professor of entrepreneurship at the University of Chicago, says failure is critical to innovation entrepreneurship. So this is something that, when we are in Europe, might not be obvious. So if you can tell us more about that. On a general basis, I want this session to be interactive. So if you have any question, do not hesitate to raise hand and ask your question to the panelists.
Thank you. I love the topic of failure because it's something that many people consider to be taboo, and we don't really like to highlight those stories or tell those stories or teach those stories when we teach entrepreneurship and what the possibilities are. But of course, everyone here knows that entrepreneurship is a highly risky activity, and there's lots and lots of failure, some of the statistics that you just said. And this is, in fact, something that we try to talk about and address and think about what we can do to help entrepreneurs be more comfortable with risk and with the possibilities of failure. So I think for starters, I would just say, Pierre and I were discussing this earlier, that in the US, there's a perception among startups and entrepreneurs that failure is very customary. Lots of people fail. It's completely acceptable. And entrepreneurs know how to deal with failure, and that's sort of a normal thing. And I would say that that is partially true and partially untrue. Certainly, a lot of people do fail, and that is common. And I have investors who I work with who, in fact, will not invest in an entrepreneur unless he or she has had at least one failure in an entrepreneurial venture before. And of course, the reason for that is that failure is a great learning opportunity. And if you've only had success, you might not really understand what was underneath that success and what drove that success. And so from an investor's point of view, they see lots of failures. If you're a venture capital investor, you are assuming some number of the ventures in your portfolio are not going to go well. For the entrepreneur, of course, failure can seem like the end of the world. And so I've yet to meet an entrepreneur. And in my time at the university, I've worked with thousands at this point of entrepreneurs. I've yet to meet an entrepreneur who feels comfortable with failure. And so it's partially untrue that I think in the US, people who start businesses just, are okay if they go sideways. I don't think that's true. I think it's a very personal and hard thing when a company fails for the entrepreneur. However, I do think there are ways, and this is what in the class that I teach, that I try to teach this, I think there are ways to fail well and there are ways to fail poorly. So for example, I'll just tell you one story of an entrepreneur I had visiting my class to meet with the students, and he had had a venture in Chicago that had gotten a lot of great press. Most of the venture capital investors who do digital tech investing in the city had been early investors in this company. And unfortunately, it did not result in a success a couple of years later. And one of the investors happened to be visiting that class today, on that day that the entrepreneur came in and talked about what it was like to fail. And the investor has a folder for every single investment in his office. He does tons of angel investing. For every single investment he's ever made, those that are successful, those that fail. And he had actually kept and removed and took out and showed everyone the letter that the entrepreneur had personally written to describe the failure. And it was something that he had kept because it was so well written, and the entrepreneur had expressed himself so nicely that he said, the next time you start a company, I would invest in you again. I know you've learned from your failure and you handled it gracefully. And that's an example I would give of failing well and being able to deal with the failure.
Other panelists want to comment?
I mentioned a few things to follow up on failing well and failing not well, but there are many reasons for which a failure can occur, some of which are okay, and others, meaning the entrepreneur and the investor, could tolerate, others of which would be more painful and more difficult to tolerate. So if the entrepreneur fails because of like an implementation failure, there's implementation risk. that the leadership team simply can't get it together to lead the team that's doing the research, that's doing the product development, that's doing the marketing aspects. If it's a failure due to implementation risk, management failures, those are more difficult to get over. So that's, one should have been able to avoid that. If you fail because of a market risk, that you developed a product for which a market did not exist, or a market was not of the capacity that you thought it was, that also is a difficult failure, and that probably you should have been able to predict those things. If, however, one fails based on a technological or scientific risk, that the hypothesis that you were pursuing wasn't correct, or the animal model was not indicative of what could be expected in the human indication, these things are very difficult to predict. You construct studies to try to get at those risks, at those scientific and technological risks, but those studies are incomplete. Otherwise, there's no if there's no risk in the enterprise, then it's unlikely to be taken forward by the kind of enterprises these are. So those risks are more acceptable, more understanding when you encounter them. So one can drive into a clinical trial in a health tech or healthcare medical product and fail in the clinical trial. I think that's a much more understandable reason for failing.
Maybe just to add on this, I thought a bit about a question. Is Europe more failure averse and US more failure welcoming? Probably it is. There's differences in the systems, differences in sort of even the social networks and all of that or sort of that make that there is this difference. But I think in biotechnology where we are, I think we're lucky that people who invest in biotechnology know that this is a business where failure is part of the business. Clinical trials succeed or fail. And I think what I feel is that there is in our field a tolerance, or even more than a tolerance, an acceptance of failure. So at least I've had a negative readout of a trial, and okay, it's not good, but it is part of the business, and so that's I think where maybe we're lucky in biotech, and that we don't have that big difference that maybe in other sectors is the case. And I agree with it really depends on where the failure is, obviously. Yeah, so if it's other type of failure, yeah, that's should not be tolerance for it.
So I went from running businesses for those big companies to buying companies or buying products and putting them into the pipeline of Roche. So until I did the deals, I didn't know you could actually really fail. Because if you do your homework for launching a product or managing a company, at the beginning, maybe every now and then you fail because you're learning how to manage a product or a sales territory. But eventually you learn and you have the tools and you know how to get a business well done. But as we said, in the biotech business or the pharma business in development, things are going to fail every now and then. So I just want to share my experience with my first really big failure. I did a deal of 100 million. The thing was in phase 2, so there was risk, and it's part of the game for a big company like Roche. But eventually, even though the trial was positive, the FDA rejected the molecule, and this was a shock. Not really because of our assumptions, because it was part of the risk, but for me personally, it was just really difficult to swallow. So I called a friend of mine who had been head of BD of a big company and even CEO to ask him, look, the product isn't going to make it, and I just really feel terrible about it. I cannot get over it. I really feel I personally failed, even though my boss doesn't care. Nobody seems to really be sorry. I cannot take it. And he told me, look, you're in the business development world. You have to assume every single one of your deal is going to fail. And it's all a matter of just make sure you don't fail too big on something that you just could not assess the risk. As long as you're transparent in your assessment and you understand the risk and you don't take it for granted that you're going to fail, you still continue to suffer when you fail and be completely determined to manage the risk, then I think you're going to learn how to cope with it. And I found this really helpful. I think the biotech world is a world where we fail, but on the other hand, if you keep on failing, at the end of the day, you're wasting money. So you just have to really continue feeling the pain, because there is a way to manage. There is a way to have an assumption. There is a way to not drink from your own Kool-Aid, as we say. just really try to think, if you don't have dose ranging, don't even go there. You don't have dose ranging, or it's not coherent, the low dose and the high dose, it's not going to work. Or if it works, it's a miracle, and we're not in the miracle business. So I think there is just the mindset, but also, it's someone's money. So in my case now, it's one person's money. So it's a whole different feel on the risk level. But before it was, all the employees, and they depend on the success of the company. So I think the stinging of the failure is still a good, healthy thing, but not to get paralyzed, obviously.
Any question in the room about success and failure and the differences between the US and Europe? Okay. So I would like to tackle a second topic, which is very important, which is the efficiency of the health tech system. So a quick, smooth, and financially fair transfer of industrial property and technology between the academic research and the innovative SMEs is essential to the success of the entrepreneurs. And when we think about the ecosystem, the health tech ecosystem, we naturally think about the flourishing Massachusetts biotech system. Additional ecosystem, such as the Chicago, are emerging to attract and return health tech talent and companies. Maybe Jeff, you can comment on your experience of the ecosystem, because you have worked both. I mean, you are working both in the US and Europe. And can you comment on the differences and the similarities?
Yeah, I can. And my experiences in Europe are really mostly in Switzerland, which is kind of its own little island, I think, within Europe in its entrepreneurial perspective. But so the healthcare, what is special about places like Boston or San Francisco or South San Francisco that may be lacking even in large American cities like Chicago is the density of the population that's focused on the biotech industry. The number of investors and the amount of capital that's local, the number of potential board members that don't have to travel 1,000 kilometers to get to your company for a board meeting, the number of employees that's present there. I think that part of the ecosystem is really special about these population centers that you mentioned. I have a company in Boston, like I mentioned, Enochion. It's so easy to hire employees into a high-risk operation because they know that if the company fails, they don't have to move their family and their cat after the company fails to find a new job. Rather, they know that there are 20 new jobs available within a period of a month that don't require them to relocate. I think that density of entrepreneurship, that density of the ecosystem is something that takes a long time to build up. We in Chicago are trying to build that up, but it's a long road to go up. And so there are some sites in Europe that do have that density, and they naturally have a competitive advantage. So the availability of capital that's not very distant and the availability of employees that's not very distant is certainly important. One downside of that density is that it's difficult to retain people, that they can leave your company and get a new job without having to move their cat. So that means that if you go to situations like Boston, the typical employee gets a promotion every 6 months because you're trying to retain them. And they get raises of 5% a year. It's a challenge to retain. Was there a question or comment?
Microphone?
Maybe take one of these up here.
Thank you. Is there any governmental initiative at the beginning of what happened in Boston or in Cambridge? Because I used to go there like in the late 90s, early 2000, and that was nothing compared to what happens today. So what was in your understanding or knowledge at the origin of this incredible boom in the biotech industry there?
Yeah, I don't believe that there was a governmental strategy, a city governmental strategy to make Boston a biotech ecosystem center of the world. I think it was mostly the entrepreneurship that was going on at MIT and to an extent Harvard, the size of Harvard's medical school, and then the number of deals that were coming out, or potential deals, that were coming out of those two institutions. After that, the whole thing became self-reinforcing. Self-reinforcing in that Big Pharma wanted to move into town to be close to that innovation hub and to be able to be receiving of some of those young biotechs through partnerships and innovation. So that's why Novartis, moved a substantial fraction of its operation to Cambridge, and now many, many others. So I think it started out academically with the academic institutions having a strategy, building biotech entrepreneurial space like One Kendall, and then others that came close to it, where one could go in, rent benches, and then rent space after you graduated from needing a few benches and step up and up. But there are others that are local on the ground there.
Just to complement Just to complement what you just said, MIT has funded 25,000 companies. It is the 11th employer and founder of companies. 2 trillion of sales are coming from spin-off from MIT. So you take MIT, Harvard, and the crowd there, and you can imagine how the rich ecosystem from brain.
Yeah, so I will just add to Jeff exactly what you described, Jeff. The governmental action, and there was one back in 2008, and this was signed in law by Governor Patrick. And it was a really state of Massachusetts decision to invest $1 billion over 10 years into the life science in Massachusetts. So this is how over now 10 years, we have 20% of the workforce in Massachusetts in life science, and we generate $25 billion a year in revenue.
I can just add to what everybody said. One other thing, it's not just enough to have the hospitals and the institutions, because Chicago, this is the thing that when I was at Northwestern 20 years ago, we tried to get more biotech. We had an organization called Women Promoting Biotech Industry, and it was both people in academia and in business. And we've got like 4 or 5 teaching hospitals in Chicago. We've got 3 top universities, 2 top medical schools, really, multiple, but like 2 of the top 10, Northwestern and U Chicago, and there's a lot of stuff coming out. And the thing is, you also need this investor environment, because everything else should be there, right? But we just don't. We're still growing, and this is where we're hoping to end up. But I just wanted to add that.
Building on what you said, your great comments about clusters, there are 2 issues with clusters that you know just as well. One is forming them, and the other is maturing them. And for instance, I speak a lot for biotech, and I was speaking in San Diego to a meeting of the 400 companies that are there. And a current theme in San Diego is some frustration that in the San Diego cluster, for some reason, it doesn't get to the maturity of the Bay Area or Boston. A lot of companies tend to exit by being acquired, or for some reason don't get to the Amgen size or the whatever. So, how would you in Europe? Is it going to be hard also to not only to form these clusters, but to mature them? And what's your experience?
Well, I can take a quick stab at this. I can't speak for Europe, but in terms of building and trying to mature an ecosystem, that's very much what I've been a part of and what we've tried to do with the Chicago ecosystem. And I completely agree with the comments that my fellow panelists and others have made, which is that you can do a heat map of all the assets that you have that would help with this, would help advance innovation. And places like Chicago that have great institutions, and places like Kendall Square in the Boston area that have great institutions. It's one thing to have the talent at that coming out of those institutions, but when you get to the scaling and the maturing stage, you know, what I've seen in Chicago, if you went back 10 years, we had a very nascent entrepreneurial ecosystem. The early stage investors weren't really there. If they were there, they were not willing to really use their risk capital. It was something very different from what you would see in a place like Silicon Valley. But you know what I hear now, we have more early stage investors. We've got the talent coming out of the universities. We've got a lot of great assets. It's the third largest city in the United States. But when it gets to maturing and scaling and having that richness and the density that Jeff described of the ecosystem, that's where things start to fall apart a little bit, because we can't attract the C-level executives to move to Chicago to help take those companies to that stage. And that's where they feel like they have to go to one of the mature ecosystems in order to get to that level. And so, frankly, perhaps this is like not promoting Chicago enough, or a place like this, when I point out some of the challenges. But I do think that these are some of the realities of how we think about building the entrepreneurial ecosystem and the talent, and what certain cities and certain geographies face in relationship to others.
Okay, I would like to ask a question more specific on tech transfer. You know, in France, we are biotech industry has really started at the beginning of the century. In the US, it was 20 years ago, and tech transfer might not be optimal today in Europe and in France. What kind of advice you could give for the transfer of technology between academic and entrepreneurs? That would be for us. Yeah.
I have, in fact, some experience with tech transfer in Europe, not yet in the US as such. But what I hear and what I feel what the difficulty is maybe the lack of experience, and therefore sometimes also some expectations that are not really realistic. And I was just reading something from the LEM, or from the EBE, saying indeed that sort of if you look at the royalty rates or the license fee, US versus Europe, on average it's lower in the US, and maybe it has matured and it has sort of become more a thing to do in the US, whereas in Europe it's very often is still difficult to let go technology that has been funded by government-sponsored research. And so I think it's also something that we'll probably learn over time.
What is the average time, in your opinion, from a tech transfer from academic to entrepreneurs in the US?
Well, I would say in the U.S., we see, after the filing of a patent, we see tech transfer happening within a period of a few months. So if a company or a nascent company, a startup, approaches the university with the intent to license, I think within 5 months or 4 months that license has been executed. So they're not long negotiations. I agree with what Gilles said, that I think, based on my experiences in Switzerland and my experience in Chicago, the expectations in Switzerland may have been exaggerated a little bit, and it was always a challenge to try to convince the university, for example, that they didn't need to take 10% of an equity stake of a startup company, or they didn't need an 8% royalty on net sales, numbers that would effectively kill a deal. So it was possible to bring them down to more realistic expectations. But I think the American situation, and my experience in Switzerland was exactly the same. It's very efficient at getting the deal done.
I would say that sometimes it can be hard to find who you have to negotiate with in France. It has improved over the years, but sometimes you were a bit running around the offices to try to know who you're supposed to negotiate with. There was also sometimes not really a sense of urgency. So we start a negotiation and we have time, and sometimes it could take over a year to get somewhere. So no pharma company can keep on going for a year unless they really have nothing else to do. So I think that is not optimal. And then I would say I agree, the expectations in the US are sometimes very aggressive, but in Europe even more. So there is a bit of a reality touch that is always necessary. I have to say I have had the experience with a US in university, very well known, where we had a deal about to be signed and we just needed the deal terms between the small company and the university to be dramatically revamped because they were just killing the deal. It was a case of the university doing too good of a deal with a biotech, and we were able to renegotiate this within 2 weeks, which is really incredible. But the idea, going to what are we talking about? We're talking about global rights. There is this big company they're about to sign, but these 2 terms aren't going to happen if we don't fix it. And there was a dialogue which was possible. I have found that sometimes in France, for sure, the dialogue isn't as easy. I have witnessed the evolution of France in the past few days and few years, so I know it's getting there, but that's still something to keep in mind.
I wonder sometimes, too, if the differences between the European Technology Transfer Office and the American Technology Transfer Office have to do with the perception of what it means to succeed and what it means to fail. That if the tech transfer officer, if their job is to do deals, that motivates them indeed to get a deal done and to get a deal quickly and to get a deal done under reasonable terms. If, however, a successful drug comes out and their boss comes and says, why didn't you get 4.5%? Why did you only get 4%? If they're focused on the fear of failure, that they didn't get a good enough deal, or then they'll take forever to do the deal. And so I think it's very important that the tech transfer officers be highly motivated to get things done.
I think you trigger a thought by your comment, which is, the pharma company has to give in some things. The tech transfer office has to have a win. We are trained to negotiate to the end of it, right? This is our job. And the tech transfer, oftentimes it's scientists, they can be entrepreneurs. You have some amazing tech transfer people, but at the end of the day, we are more armed, we have more time, we're paid more. So I think elegance is also necessary in a negotiation where we give a chance to the university to have a win. And so when the drug reaches the market and it's a big sales number, they don't feel embarrassed. And I had a tech transfer person who was genuine enough to tell me, what am I going to say if you suddenly, and I could hear that. So I think your comment is really a good one.
Any question in the room for tech transfer? Okay. So the next topic I would like to address is financing. We know that in Europe and in France, we have difficulties with private financing, especially what we call the Death Valley. And that's the first question I would like to ask to Sophie is, through your experience at Roche and now your experience as an investor, what are the soft skills and hard skills an entrepreneur should master when he's approaching you?
So first of all, I think the entrepreneur has to understand his business and his business plan and how much cash he's going to need and how much he has in the bank. You have a number of entrepreneurs who are driven by the vision and the desire to get this product to patients and to the market, but they really are totally underestimating what it will take, how long it will take. In general, oftentimes you don't even have a drug, you have a product, stuff that needs to be turned into a drug. So already you have 18 months that are going to go longer. And then the clinical trials are oftentimes, I would say, 30 to 40% longer than what the entrepreneur has in mind, even if he's super brilliant, just because pharma is more risk averse than an entrepreneur who is doing the entrepreneurship because he's more open to risk. So all these end up being numbers. If the entrepreneur really is just a visionary and a scientist and a passionate person, but not also a bit of an accountant, this is a bit of a challenge. So we're looking for people who really understand what they're talking about financially. And the second thing is everything should be based on evidence. What have I demonstrated up to now, and what will I demonstrate next? I think oftentimes the discussion can be very positive about, I have already proven this, that, and other things. And then when you actually start looking into it, you don't see it. I think transparency is a really important thing. The entrepreneur should be transparent with the pharma. And by the way, the pharma should also be transparent with the entrepreneur so that you have a really granular, good discussion. And then I think at the end, it's having aligned goals on getting products to the market, not making the maximum money into this deal. I want a big upfront. I want it now. And then, you know, I have put in competition a few companies, and whoever gives me the most money, and if possible, the most money the sooner, is going to win the deal. I think a long-term vision where you are finding a partner who is going to come with you to fund the development or help you to fund another source of funding at some point is really important. I think it's all about having genuine relationships. Oftentimes we just forget this because it's a transaction. And I think going back to being two people trying to get to success is a really important thing. There was a discussion earlier on China. And I think, so I have dealt with deals in China, I've dealt with deals in Israel and Switzerland and other countries. And I think in some culture, win-win doesn't exist. It's win-lose is more fun. And win-lose is more logical because there is a imbalance of information. But win-lose doesn't get sustainable success because at the end of the day, there is always going to be a tomorrow after the deal is signed. Something else will happen, something else will derail that you're going to have to renegotiate, refund, or do something else. Or even if you do nothing else on this product, you're going to meet again. It's a small industry. We meet all the time. So win-win is a really important concept.
And what advice would you give to an entrepreneur who is facing some, I would say, when a farmer is showing muscle and when the entrepreneur has a good project, but there's a kind of unbalance of power?
So it's easier said than done, what I will say. So I realize that. Ask yourself if you really want to work with those people. Because a deal is a marriage. And you're going to stay a long time, and when you're with them, you're not with someone else. And if you have really no choice and you have to sign this one deal, no, you're going to get married to someone you don't really love, and he's not going to love you. So then marriage can work that way too, but you just have to have a really good contract. I always end up with those analogies for some reason, but I'm not the only one.
Someone else wants to comment? Gilles, you have some experience I think, Gilles, you have some experience in dealing with pharma and dealing with investors, and sometimes you were probably in a situation where you were not, you were unbalance of power between you and the other part, no? No? No.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll comment more on the investor side of things, because I think what Sophie says, it's exactly the same with the investors. The transparency and really the data-driven, making sure that you know the case and that you have the. It's sometimes a bit more difficult because with investors, certainly if you're a publicly listed company, there's not often everything you can say, but still then the transparency is the way to go. On the partnership, I can only agree. I've not had that many partnering type of deals, but yes, it is a long-term relationship, and you cannot just do a quick deal and then, because otherwise you're just stuck behind afterwards. So fully agree.
Melody and Jeff?
I've negotiated a few partnerships as well. I mean, I could say that it's similar, that you get into a long-term relationship. It's in my opinion, it's more important that the relationship be tenable, that you can succeed with the partner, than it is that the dollar signs or the euro signs in front of the deal. That I would rather have a deal that was smaller with a partner that I was certain we could work with than I would a deal that were larger with a partner that I was unsure, unless it were just a straight-up acquisition where I could simply walk away from the deal after it was done. That's not usually the case. So I think it's more important to focus on how the partnership is going to operate, what a joint steering committee is going to look like, and who those individuals are, how we'll go through and make decisions about how to drive from one stage of product development to another stage of product development in partnership, and then to market in partnership. I think that those follow-through things are more important than the amount of cash that's up front. It's easy to be disappointed if the amount is half of what you thought it should be, but still, it's more important that it not be zero at the end of the day based on a failed partnership.
And there's another question is that sometimes from the perspective of the entrepreneurs, you want to keep equity, and sometimes you prefer to have more equity of a small cake than small equity of a big cake. Can you compare between the US and Europe, this feeling?
I think that there are many more American entrepreneurs that want to have a large fraction of whatever cake there is, because they're convinced that it's going to be a big cake at the end of the day. So I'm not sure that's not my own perspective. My own perspective, and it's a phrase that I use often, but it's much better to be a live dog than a dead lion. I'm a kind of guy who just wants to have a reasonable share, a fair share of a cake that's as interesting as I can get. And if it's not 90% of it, if it's rather 10% of it, I'm quite satisfied. But maybe I'm easy to please.
Okay. So any question on the financing you would like to ask to the panelists, and some comment on, no. Okay. Actually, I have a question regarding the cultural environment. There is an increased awareness in France or in Europe that the educational system has probably not properly educated generation of students to entrepreneurship. This is, of course, improving a lot, but could you tell us if and how entrepreneurship is embedded in the US educational system? Maybe Melody, you can comment on that?
Okay, I can comment on this both as a mother of a child who spent his first 10 years in Switzerland in public schools, and as a person who's taught in universities and engineering students in universities here and there. And I think that what I'm going to say is entirely general, there's very much exceptions in all directions, but I think if I were to say on all levels, the universities to elementary schools, one of the things that is definitely focused on more in the US is breadth and presentation skills and writing, presenting. Maybe it's too much, and the confidence issue is a huge thing. And I mean, we see the downside of that, for example, with Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes, like somebody, she didn't even go to college, and she somehow managed to convince people she had some great thing, which clearly was fraudulent. On the other hand, you see in Switzerland, and that's what I can compare to, but I had a lot of students from different countries in Europe, including France, Italy, Spain, Greece, and they were all so much better trained in math and their basic sciences, so the depth was so much more focused on. And I think it's just that considering the way, you can't, right now you can't just be an engineer unless you want to stay in the same job for your entire life. You're an engineer, then you're a manager, then you might move up the ladder to a vice president. And for all of those things, you need more than just your engineering background. And it's the same, I think, with entrepreneurship. It's not, having confidence is a big thing. And so somehow that needs to be pushed, I think, a little bit more. And at the same time, it can be too much, as we see, and I think that can be annoying in both directions.
You know that we will have oral presentation at the baccalaureate in France, so it's improving. Maybe Star, you had many students from all around the world. Do you see differences with the cohorts coming from Europe and the US cohort?
Yeah, and I would actually expand on this a little bit to say that there's quite interesting research that shows the effects of teaching entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship skills to students at a very young age before they get to a place like university and where they might have access to classes of that nature, or they might be embedded in engineering or one of these other fields. And this is a place where government or NGOs or the general nonprofit sector can play a role too. There's a very successful organization like that in the US called NIFTY, which stands for the National Foundation for Teaching Entrepreneurship. And they have, if you look at their data, they track all the outcomes in terms of career paths of all different kinds of children, how many of them end up going to college, how successful they are in college, and then in their careers from a more longitudinal study. And it it is interesting to see how effects of teaching entrepreneurship and its things, in addition to presentation and communication skills, but critical thinking and problem solving and collaboration and creativity and all of the business skills that come into thinking about how to build a venture, if you expose that children to that at an earlier age, it can have quite an outsized impact. Now at the university, I work a lot with undergraduate students and with graduate students teaching entrepreneurship, you know, the very essence of entrepreneurship. And, you know, certainly it's something that did not exist as a field of educational study in the US not all that long ago. Our Center for Entrepreneurship has been around about 20 years now, and so you can really look at the curriculum at a place like the University of Chicago and see when did we start teaching it and what were the effects of this. And it's interesting to see how much it has become embedded in a core function, not only at a place like Chicago, but in the academic realm for basically every major institution, certainly in the US. And I'd be interested to see how and what is being taught here. It's something I'm obviously very passionate about, and I think has a real power to transform ideas from students at various stages.
If I could add to what Star has described, one of the things that our university does, the Polsky Center that Star co-leads, is to educate students who are not business students in business. So our engineering students can take classes in entrepreneurship during their doctoral training, for example, their PhD training. So a few of my students have done that. I know some of Melody's students have done that, and they benefit from these, and then they can integrate into the corporate world much more easily, even if they were doing basic research in their doctoral research project. Another thing that the Polsky Center does is embed MBA students in scientific teams working on a startup. So we can, as the entrepreneur professor, approach the Polsky Center and say, and I'd really like to have access to a business student or two to integrate in a team, because I'm trying to launch a new company and I need to have experience from the business side. So those students would come in with a mentor from the Polsky Center or from the Booth School of Business to provide the mentorship on the business side, but as they integrate into the scientific team. So there are these educational aspects, both for MBA students to integrate them in a technology team, as well as for technologists and engineers to integrate in it and gain entrepreneurial business experience or education as well.
At the interface between pharma companies and biotech, we have also an opportunity to develop ourselves, I think, once we are in a career. When you are in pharma, you are, for example, someone doing clinical trials or pharmacovigilance or any function, and you do your job and you do it very well because you're trained with people who have done it for a long time, and there is all the resources that are needed. And if you flip it and you think about a biotech, they probably have one person who is doing everything and probably, you know, a few percentage of the budget you have in your current role. And I think by helping them in your current job, reaching out to biotech and contributing to the ecosystem, you can learn a ton yourself. You can find that you actually would want to be an entrepreneur one day, and this is a way to put a toe in the water. And additionally, you help those startups in an incredible way, because what you have learned is massive. And I think there is a cross-fertilization that exists between the big and the small companies, which is fascinating. I discovered it in my previous role, and I would just really encourage all of you who are either side of the spectrum to reach out to the other side, because I think there is you can get the best out of both worlds and develop, get remotivated, because sometimes everyone is bored on their job, remotivated and learn new things, and then you can eventually change your career. So I think it makes the careers longer, this ability to develop the entrepreneurship or the big pharma genes. So this is making our, because we have to work until we are like 78 or something, then this is a good approach.
Well, another question. When I started my MBA at the University of Chicago, I was surprised because the first time I had this course, they were the US students asking questions. And I was thinking to myself, I would never have dared ask those questions during my studies in France, because I would have looked like stupid. And then I realized that it was the teaching process is like this, the learning process is like this, and everybody is like with you, and there were teachers like that at the level of Nobel Prizes, just saying there's no stupid question, I'm here to discuss with you, and encouraging the discussion and so on. So I think we have something to learn from that. Can you comment?
I've had the same experience. So being educated as an engineer in Europe, in Belgium, and sort of relatively scientific but introverted, and then coming into the Chicago, where you see the people who maybe knew much less, talking more, and I think it for me it's been really good to have both and sort of having best of both worlds. But the problem, it should not have been sequential. I think I agree. It's sort of the Chicago part should probably have been first, and then it's probably you'd need both in parallel. But and I think it has improved. I have 3 children, aged 26, 28, 31. They have a little bit more than I had, but it's not yet enough. And that's in Belgium. I don't know for France, but. So they are doing their MBAs and getting more than so they have then gradually getting it. But I think I would make a plea to start it earlier.
Because at the end of the day, it means that you are ready to take risk in front of everybody, even if you are wrong. So, start maybe.
I was commenting a little bit on the teaching style at the university a little bit, and I. Certainly am not one of our Nobel Prize winners, and there are these amazing faculty members at the university who run their classes very much in this way, but it is an approach that we adopt in all the different ways that we teach, including entrepreneurship. So in the course that I teach, which is a basic how to start a company, and we actually launch companies through this class, the students always complain at first because I don't tell them how to do something before we talk about it in class. I assign it and say, you're going to develop a marketing plan, and then we'll talk about it in class. And instead, for some of them, particularly those that might come from outside of the US, they are more accustomed to a faculty member giving a lecture on a marketing plan, and then they go work on the marketing plan. And we actually do the reverse to say, go try to do it, and then you'll come back into the class and learn how to do it. And at least what I have found, even though at first it can be very jarring to some students who weren't trained to think about being in school in a classroom in that way, they actually have a basis then to understand the points that you're making, and they've struggled through really figuring it out for themselves before we then discuss it as a class. And so it's highly interactive, as you said. It's really something that we think about as a pedagogical approach to learning that I have found to be very effective, at least in the entrepreneurship class where I am.
And to go in your direction, I was really frustrated that doing my MBA, sometimes there's no answer. And I want an answer. I'm French. I want my answer. And on business cases, there's no answer. There's just ways you can do your business. And this is something which also is important when you're an entrepreneur, is what are the options? And the most important thing is to have the options and to be able to do what we call real options. Maybe you can comment on that. Because there's no solution at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, I kind of had the reverse culture shock when I taught my first class in Switzerland, where I was like asking people and nobody would answer, nobody would raise their hand. I would call on people and they would just be silent. But I think that we introduced a design class in our engineering program, which was really sort of that, and it's really open-ended, group project-oriented. You have no idea what the answer is, but you just have to figure it out. And I feel like this kind of learning, it's getting more and more also in European education, but it still is, I think, a little bit more, it's emphasized at a younger age in America, but.
Okay. Do you have any questions in the room? So I would like to ask the panelists, maybe one or two best practices you think would be very, very important, experiences that, in your opinion, would be important for us in the room in terms of best practices from your experience.
Well, I think one thing that some American universities have done, including ours at the University of Chicago, is establish an organization specifically for the purpose of helping professors spin out companies, or almost specifically for that, so that one is not left completely on one's own to figure it out from scratch, or to find someone else who's done it and ask them for a favor of teaching you. So rather, in this aspect of a best practice, the university has a center that identifies or helps the PI, the principal investigator, identify technology that could be turned into a company and turned into products or services someday, and then comes alongside them and provides whatever is necessary to make that happen. Maybe it's little that's necessary, maybe it's only introduction to investors, but maybe it goes much beyond that in embedding business school students or staff members from this center into the startup company. I think that is something that has grown relatively recently in the United States and really helps technology come out of a university into a startup company in the US.
I don't have much to add except that I was somebody that was afraid of going into startup space, IP, because it wasn't what I was primarily focused on, but having a support system where you get support, you can have students that are more entrepreneurial, that can help, that they can take these classes at Booth, at the Polsky and at Booth, and then start to do things together, because not everybody is business-minded, that could be inventive.
Best practice, I don't know, but I'm a strong believer in having a mix of both. I think Europe has a lot to offer, US has a lot to offer, and we have the luck to have. We have now 200 people, 150 in Lyon and 50 in the US, in Cambridge and in Princeton. And so we've launched a project, Best of Both Worlds. And it is a project about, because there are cultural differences, that's for sure. But the people work very well together and stimulating that. So we organized a project around on the values and having people talk, what is different, why does he or she behave this way, and that sort of. And that's really great. And I'm a real believer that will be the strength of our company, is if we can make that work, the best of both worlds, then I think it will be, unbeatable.
Gilles, I will ask you a $1 million question. $1 million question. Why do we have in Belgium companies like Galapagos with 5 billion market cap, and we do not have such companies in France?
It will come.
Now, is there something in the ecosystem which is different?
There was something in the ecosystem, and there is something maybe a little bit like Cambridge. There is this VIB, the Flemish Institute of Biotechnology. It started in 98, putting about 25 million. It's not the same amounts as in Cambridge, but in a research institute that has brought together the best science from the different universities, 9 units competing, because after 5 years evaluating who of these groups has really delivered, and the one that did not deliver replaced by a better group. So judged on publications, judged on spin-outs and patents. And I think that has really created
competition in the academic world was something important.
And so the funding was not for granted. It was every time, okay, there was given 5 years, which is good to deliver something. It's not long, but it's long and it's not forever. So that's. And I've seen that because I've been on the board of this VIB for 9 years, and I've seen that really be an important one. Now, Galapagos is not a spin-off of VIB, but it's part of that environment that was.
And what about the tech transfer in Belgium?
And also there, I think, maybe just talk a bit pro-Belgium, but in the University of Leuven, the tech transfer is really quite efficient. It's also because the head of that tech transfer is a professor at MIT. So he has been there, very, very early on took on the idea of, yes, we need a tech transfer a la MIT to be successful, and I think there's a lot of good things came out of that.
No, because when you are talking about academic research, we have it in France.
The best, I think.
Yeah. So then, competition might be something important. That's what I understand.
I think it's difficult for me to but what I think indeed the science in France absolutely top. I think maybe indeed on this cultural thing of it's not, but sort of, can science that has been funded by government by tax money, can that create to commercial type of activity? It's still more difficult, I think. So tech transfer is still a more difficult activity. But everything is there. I think it's just needs, and then yes, the successes lead then to further successes, will lead to more money, and I think that's what needs to happen.
Okay, on a piece of advice, I'm going to take a little bit of a different tact on this and just talk to all of you as if you are all aspiring entrepreneurs one day and thinking about launching the next great new venture and doing exciting things like that. And my piece of advice is to not underestimate the quality of your relationships. I was really struck by how Sophie described the investor-entrepreneur relationship as not just being transactional. And I would say, absolutely, in what I've seen, no entrepreneur can be successful in a complete vacuum without actually building networks and bridges and relationships, not only with investors, but with talent and with other people who can help them get from point A to point B. And I think convenings like this one, which you've put together, are really important because they're the place that brings all of these people together who hopefully will end up helping each other further down the road. So I would just say invest in making relationships with people and really building the strong system around you.
So I was going to talk about this. I hesitated, then I chose something else. But what I like about, we call it a network, right? But it's not what we're talking about here. It's not that network. It's true relationships. It's actually, I like to call it friendships, professional friendships, because the genuineness of it has to be there. So I think we make a mistake when we talk always about network, and I think this was very present in this meeting. There were some real friends getting together over the years, and I think then you can call each other to help each other because there's going to be bumps in the road. So I think this is a really good point. I want to talk about focus. We start by saying we're going to develop a drug for this, or we're going to acquire a company for that, or recruit the best team to do whatever, and then we get lost along the way for some reason. Then we go hire an old friend, or we eventually, this drug is okay, but maybe we will do another indication also, which there is no mechanism or rationale to do that other indication, but 2 is better than 1, and then suddenly we're completely lost. And the world, by the way, is making us completely unfocused. It's a miracle if any one of us can keep focus nowadays. And I think without focus, there is no hope. So focus means you do what you said you would do. You wake up in the morning, this is what you spend your time on. When you are not doing it, you ask yourself, I'm doing something else. Is this okay or is it not? And oftentimes it will not be okay and you should just stop doing it. I think this is a really important thing for us and for our children too, I think. Or at least for my children.
And Sophie, I have a question, maybe the same question I asked to Jill, because Switzerland is very attractive in terms of biotech, and they are doing a good job. So can you compare the ecosystem, French ecosystem, on the Swiss?
I don't know if I can really compare. I'm on the strategic board of InnoSwiss, which is a body that funds startup in biotechs for Switzerland. And so we review projects with a business plan, and do they have a sponsor? Have they negotiated the IP? This is a Swiss way, done, thought through, documented. You have to vote, we have to agree. So it's extremely thorough, and there is money available. Every now and then we get a challenge that we're funding too much. But I always like entrepreneurs, so I will, if one says, an advisor says yes, another one says no, I will most likely say yes, because I like to give a chance. I don't know that in France there is, this thoroughness of accompanying entrepreneurs in a structured fashion. There is a lot of the Crédit Impôt Recherche is fantastic. There is France Biotech. There is other bodies in France that exist. The BPI is doing a fantastic job. So you have a lot of different layers that you can tap onto for money. But I don't know if you have necessarily the thoroughness of advice anywhere else than in the France Biotech, Paris Biotech. I think medicine can be a great body as well. So there is a few people in Switzerland is connected in one place with great experts from the industry into that body.
Thank you. Any questions from the financing? I think one question, which is the central question of HTE is the financing. And if we look at the US, I mean, there's 5 times more cash for biotech in the US than in Europe, which makes the work and the job of the CEOs more difficult, of course, in Europe. Gilles, can you comment on that?
Yes, it's true, and I think it's really the way to look at it. It's to tap in both markets. I think we were at the luck to indeed to be able to start here, relatively with small amounts of money and probably too small amounts of money. I think that's a European disease, is that we underfund the companies and therefore sort of may not have the speed of development that some US companies have. It has also good aspects, but I think certainly for companies like ours who went into phase 3 study, it needed to tap in also into the US markets. And so the only advice is to do that early on. It is a relationship building, and literally that's it. It's if you go to US to ask money when you need it, it's too late. You need to go there when you don't need it. You need to build relationships. They need to know you. They need to trust you. They need to see you are advancing on your milestones. And then, if you need money, then the chances are that you can raise money there. And then it reinforces each other, because if you can raise money as a European company, if you can raise money in the US, that reinforces also the possibility to raise money
kind of synergies
throughout Europe.
Synergies between Europe and the US. Create a synergy.
And so the only difficulty for the CEO is the lot of travel, but that's part of it.
I think to complement what you just said, we had the delegation of Swiss companies coming to our offices a couple of weeks ago, and each CEO had a few minutes to present his company, and they were just really top-notch guys. They could present to the point, and they were trained by some consultant who was there to coach them, like a team coach. And I think this is a really helpful thing. If you go to the US to raise money, just be prepared. Don't come, casually, like, okay, I'm going to meet new people. You have to be really trained like a racehorse. I would say there is, on the funding, there is the reverse problem in the US. There is too much money. So you have a Series A at 50 million, and next thing you know, the CEO is sitting on a pile of cash, and there is no way to make good decision if you can just, do mistakes and spend your money, and there is no consequences to it. So I would say it's hard in Europe or France because the money is scarce, but I think at the end of the day in the US it is not so simple. So, don't think that in the US everybody gets everything they want. One advice for the Europeans, do not out-license your rights for nothing, your US rights for nothing, because you're choking. Just realize, back to the financing of your company and the P&L that you have to build, just realize that you're going to be out of cash way ahead of that, so that you don't do those silly deals. I have people who come to my office, they gave away their US rights for 7 million. 7 million of a new technology that is actually really interesting. 7 million because they couldn't pay the bill. And I just feel bad. I try to tell them, why didn't you call me so I would help you to negotiate? So just, see the train coming to you. You always have a way to manage. If the train is far away, once it's there, it's too late.
Yes, but maybe this, I'm doing the devil advocates, but in that case, maybe this company had no choice to survive. So what advice would you give to this company if they are in this situation?
Do your cash planning 12 months before. Well, right. That's simple. Just do it. Stay focused. Yeah.
Jeff, any comment on? In the US, you had no issues for raising money? Or
In my dreams, I have no issues raising money, but outside my dreams and reality, no, it's difficult to raise money in the U.S. too. So, I mean, the expectations in the deal, at least from the entrepreneur side, from the academic scientist side, the expectations are very, very high. Just tremendous amounts of data are expected to be able to support a reasonable size Series A, say a $20 million Series A, tremendous amount of data for which one will be hammered on the price of a deal, on the pre-money valuation. So there is a lot of money for biotech investment in the United States, but it is by no means easy to get. It requires a tremendous amount of experimental data.
So what from the discussion what I understand is from the beginning, when you have money from the BPI, when you start your preclinical study, you have to start to build your network with investors, right?
Once you have IP and you have
IP, it's even earlier.
and some data, something that you can show.
So it should be, relationship with investors should be from the beginning, from the even preclinical, when you are in, when you get the IP. So when the tech transfer occurs, your advice is already to start networking with investors.
Absolutely, and I'll say what Jill said too, that it comes with this relationship development with the investor, showing them after one meeting, after another meeting, that you are a train that is moving. You're generating new data from one meeting to another meeting to the next.
Keeping them updated with your new data, right?
Absolutely, keeping them updated. Just give me 20 minutes with slides. I'll be on the phone with you. I'll send you a PDF. We'll walk through the new data that we've gotten in the last 4 months.
So, and then if you come in end of phase 1 for your money for phase 2, it's too late.
Absolutely, yeah.
Chip? Any questions about financing in our last? Okay. So if you have last comments or words, and I'm sure, Sophie, you have a last advice.
This was, I think this was a really good discussion. I think the advice is follow your heart and your brain at the same time.
And what I understand, Sophie, what you said is that it should be a win-win relationship between the entrepreneurs, the investors, and the big pharma, right?
Yes.
I'm doing it the Chicago way.
I think there is so much opportunity here in Europe, and I think...
Yeah, that's the question, Jill. How do you see Europe in the coming 10 years?
I think it's booming, exactly. That's it. And I think the prices have gone down in the US, but still, I think there's a lot of undervalued assets relative here. And I think the US investors are seeing that. And when I was with Tygenix, that was founded in 2010, US investors, very, very difficult to get interested in Europe. I think that's now very different. So there is really an interest, but indeed, with the homework done and the relationship built early on, but we have really a lot to offer here.
Sophie, Europe in 10 years in the biotech?
I'm going to do deals here. I said it, I'm saying it again. We're a late stage fund. We're interested with whatever you have that is late stage. All right?
And from the perspective of the US, how do you see the European, you have companies in Switzerland, but how do you see the biotech, health tech industry in Europe in the coming 10 years, and how it's going to grow?
I share the enthusiasm that Jill expressed, that I think the situation is becoming very active here. There are many U.S. VC funds that are putting offices in Europe, so because they realize that there is a tremendous amount of basic research, of inventive research that's being developed here, and that there's not necessarily enough capital to satisfy the demand for capital. So I think that many of the VC funds that I interact with are establishing offices here in Europe to be able to drive that forward.
And I also wanted to agree with Sophia in what you said earlier, that I think that being on both sides, there are so many advantages to being in Europe that I think can be played to a lot, and one of them is just the social network, and so basically the level of socialism that's enough to be a good safety net to give people security, job security and everything, but on the other hand not be so crazy like in America where, okay, we're throwing 50 billion around or 50 million around, whatever, but at the same time there's, you know, I mean, part of it is what supports this culture. Like, it's really easy to get, you know, nobody stays in a job for more than a couple of years, basically. We can't keep secretaries because they just are constantly moving up. You're constantly moving to something better. But at the same time, this insecurity is also kind of eating away at our social fabric. And I think, you know, learning from the mistakes of the U.S. and keeping this European cultural values can be really interesting. I think I would much rather live to be honest. I mean, you know, we keep half the time we're like, wait, why did we move back?
and looking on the other side of the coin, what are the I would say in the US the things that we should absolutely not do like they are doing?
I don't, Brexit? No, don't do that. Just kidding, I don't know.
I mean, in terms of entrepreneurship or in terms
Right. I was joking. I don't know, do you want to comment on that?
Things that we should not do in the American model?
No, I mean, there's the American way of entrepreneurship, but also there's very good thing that we need to incorporate and we need to learn, but there's also things we should keep a little bit our hands away because it's maybe not the right thing to do here.
I don't know, the cultural values in Europe in general are just more like, maybe a little more safe, and you could say there are pros and cons with that, but at the same time, doing things more carefully and thoughtfully, and like you said, building things like focus, all these things. I'm not being very articulate, I'm sorry, but I feel like that when, you know, doing things the right way and carefully, but still being able to take some risk and having like the best of both worlds, like Shil said. I mean, I really think like to try to see what's good and not good, so good in each system.
I'm not sure that it's what you should not do, but I think in the United States entrepreneurial environment, there's too much of a focus on the exit, as though the exit is the end of the game. That as the scientist in the laboratory, I want to achieve an exit. And that's naturally a good thing, don't get me wrong. But I think what we should really be focused more on is the product or the service. The patient. The thing that was of value to the patient at the end of the day. In that I can think of many cases of startups in the United States that achieved a successful exit that then a year after exit all went south. Stock price declines greatly because it's not going to turn into a real product. So I think that we need not only to have the exit in mind, but also the end of the day, the impact on the patient.
Yeah.
Which brings value.
Yeah.
I was going to comment similar to Jeff that I think we focus a lot on how much money startups raise. You know, they raised X million dollars, and therefore it means success when that's not always correlated with success necessarily, instead of impact or jobs created or other economic benefit, not just the amount of capital that a company was able to take in. So I think it's quite an interesting question to think about. I also would just echo what was said earlier, that I do think Europe will benefit from investors from the US looking for deals and looking for them, feeling like it's frothy in the US or the valuations are too high and it is really hard to find a good deal. And that's benefiting here. It's also benefiting cities like Chicago, basically everywhere that's not Silicon Valley and Boston. And so it will drive more of the investors to look in other places. And I would just say what's interesting from just thinking about this conversation with biotech, there's in some cases more of a linear path towards making progress. With some of the health tech companies that I've worked with that are not biotech but are looking at different technology applications within hospital systems and others, you know, when they go to talk to investors, it's quite interesting. And one of the phenomenons that we run into a lot in Chicago is that the venture capital community and the investor community will not say yes to that making the investment, but they will also not say no, ever. And so the entrepreneur, it's a test for the entrepreneur to see what do you do when the investor says, that's interesting, but come back in 6 months, or that's interesting, but come back in 3 months. And they will never say no because they are worried about missing out on a great deal potentially and turning it down. But it's really a test to see what the character of the entrepreneur is like, how organized can they be, will they gather more data, will they be able to show progress over time.
Sophie, you wanted to? Okay. So, last chance for questions or comments. Okay, so I would like to thank the panel because they flew from Chicago and they flew from Boston to be here today. So it shows the interest of the US for Europe, for Paris, for France, and for biotech. And I'm sure and I hope this panel was very good for you, and that now that you are going out for a coffee, you have learned many things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Thank you, our expert international panel. Thank you. Go ahead. So we're now going to move on to our final discussion. We're going to continue digging into looking at the possibilities of bridging academia with industry. And our main guest leads the development of new initiatives at the Massachusetts General Hospital Research Institute to help scientists engage in productive collaborations with industry at all stages of their work. So please welcome Gabriela Opeyou. Oh, the pointer. That'll be here. So this is the big green button. Big green button, that's the pointer. Yeah. And now to host our final discussion with Gabriela, a serial entrepreneur in life sciences companies, co-founder, general manager of Truffle Capital. Please welcome Philippe Pouletti, which I hope is here. He got delayed. At 5:30. Christian, you want to step in with Philippe? Yeah, but yeah. It's written 5:30. So, would you all agree to a 5-minute break while we wait for Philippe? Yes. Okay. Sorry about that.
be fortunate. You gotta be lucky now. I was just sitting here thinking of me. But I'm the kind of woman that was built to last. They tried to reason me. They couldn't wipe out my past. To save my child, I'd rather go hungry. I got all the people on the earth inside of me, and my blood flows through every man. In this God's land that delivered me, I got so many tears even the blind could see. This is a woman's world. This is my world. This is a woman's world for this man's girl. There ain't a woman in this world, not a woman or a girl.
Ok, on y va? On a fait un petit...
Est-ce qu'on peut avoir un verre propre pour Gabriella? Parce que le verre...
Si, il y avait un verre. Où elle est? Non, non. C'est bon. C'est votre verre, là. Ouais. So we can settle down after the coffee break, the impromptu coffee break, and welcome with a warm round of applause, Philippe and Gabriella.
So, good afternoon, Philippe Pouletti, CEO of Truffle Capital. We are almost done of a very hectic day, but we always keep the best for the end, don't we? And we are very pleased at the end. I mean, Marie Vognan's speech, of course, at the end. And we are very pleased to have Gabriella Appiu, who is a professor of dermatology at Harvard Medical School and works at the Mass General Hospital, and especially on translational research and bridging academia and industry. She speaks fluent French because she used to study in Angers and in Créteil, but we'll keep it English. As a matter of introduction, we're not going to compare today France, Europe, the US in terms of how it works between academia and startups and industry. But my estimate of the number of new patent applications which the inventors themselves will take into their startups, an assistant professor saying, I want to start a startup with my patent, is probably less than 20%. Would you agree with that?
I think it depends on the institution, of course, and we can talk about Mass General.
Yep. And it means that we have much progress to make to exploit the extraordinary level of technological and scientific innovation in the best labs of the best universities worldwide into products and technologies. And certainly startup companies is often the best, although bridging academia and larger companies is also a must. So tell us, Gabriella, how you are making a difference in what Mass General Hospital did before, and what are some of the examples of concrete results you've got?
So thank you, Philippe. I would like to start by saying I'm thrilled to be here today. We are privileged to be here as Mass General Research Institute to share our experience with us, with you, and to learn from you. I think it has been a great journey these last 2 days, and I want to thank Philip Courtet, who really had a vision to bring this academic perspective here in. I think I will echo many of the comments of my colleagues before, from Chicago and Boston. So I think we are on the same path. What I would start by saying, and I will go to Mass General and how we try to change it and why we try to change it. I think the bridge US-Europe is absolutely critical. I think the international research is critical because I think the healthcare problems we are facing are huge, are very complex. They are not easy solutions. So, and you heard over these last 2 days, we want to cure Alzheimer. We want to cure cancer. So these are very, very important healthcare problems. There are patients in need there. So we need to get together to really solve this. So I think this is talking about the bridge. And of course, you mentioned my training in 3 different countries in Europe, working in industry and academia also here in Paris, and then moved to Boston 8 years ago. And before I tell you what we are trying to change at Mass General, I would like to tell you a little bit what Mass General is. And this was also for me when I arrived there. I discovered this huge research potential and history. And I think I have a slide, if I can have the first. Yeah, so we picked 2 pictures there, and actually I don't have it on my screen in front of me, so, okay. So Mass General, what you see there is the Bullfinch building. This was the first Mass General hospital, founded in 1811. You see there, as a general hospital, we still say today, we treat all diseases, so we go across different organs. And today, you see all the buildings there are Mass General hospitals, so 1,000 plus beds. We are still a general hospital, and our mission stayed the same. It's a 4-pillar mission, so it's very important. So one is, of course, patient care. Second one is research. Then education and teaching. We are the largest Harvard Medical School teaching hospital in Boston, and then community service. So these are our four missions. I will talk a lot about the research today because this is where we come together. And yes, we are ranked consistently top 5 hospitals in the United States. But I think what is very important, we are the largest research enterprise, hospital-based research enterprise in the US. We are a non-profit organization. I think it's very important for my comments, following comments, to understand this. And I think Mass General, when we think about, is the first, when you look to the innovation, what happened there, I think if you go back, is the first anesthesia, ether anesthesia, and this was there in this Bullfinch building, and we still use this conference room there. So there are lectures going on. But this was 1846. And then we have the first MRI there, 79. And then we have the first tumor clinic in 1925. And the first combination antiviral demonstration was Mass General. And overall, these Nobel Prizes, 12 Nobel Prizes who trained at Mass General. So very, very innovation-driven hospital. We really think research helps us to give the best care to our patients. And that's why we are very, very much into this bridging academia with industry, because we think it's about the science, and we want to make sure our science makes it to the patient, and we need you all in order to make it to the patients. So we need industry.
So give us one example or two of technologies which came from Mass General and which made it to efficacy trial and which changed medicine.
Sure. I mean, a recent one, 98, now it's Enbrel, it's an arthroid, rheumatoid arthrosis drug, now manufactured by Amgen. It was, an invention at Mass General. It's a very, very successful drug. This is a
It's
recent...
very good, and of course, Pierre Courteil and Abivax are going to beat this one.
Sure.
But more recent?
So I think this is, I think this is one we look through, and we can talk about. I mean, there are many things in dermatology and in photomedicine and imaging. There are 2,000 labs at Mass General, so 2,000 principal investigators. Again, it goes across the therapeutic areas. So there are 8,500 people working in research, 30 different departments, centers, institute. So Mass General is 26,000 employees total. We published 7,000 papers last year, and we filed 600 patents. 200 were granted. I can tell you, so we roughly
filed 600 in the last how many years?
Yeah, in average by year, we filed this, and roughly 200 granted. So this is the ratio. We create as an average, between 20 and 30 startups every year. What I can also tell you, out of our research portfolio, our patents, roughly 40% goes to startup companies, and then you have a part going to small and medium-sized companies. These are roughly 30%, and then the rest to the large companies. There is 1% going to other academic institutions. So this is the ratio, relatively balanced portfolio. The most goes to new startups.
Do you have an estimate of revenues that the licensed patents generate, both royalties and stock?
So I can tell you how our funding comes in, because based on that, I will tell you why we launched this Bridging Academia with Industry initiative. Because if you hear the numbers, we are very successful, of course. But the majority of our discoveries doesn't make it to the clinic. So we have a problem. This is first. And the second point is when we look to our annual budget, it's last year $900 million, 40. So it's again a significant, so again the largest hospital-based research enterprise. We bring all this money in every year, so 40% comes from NIH. Then you have roughly 30% coming from foundations, private and public, and also other nonprofits. And the rest is shared between internal funding mechanisms and philanthropy, and the rest comes from royalties and licenses, and this is an average 8%. So when you look to the potential there, we said a few years ago, maybe this is not enough. We have to look how
it's
to
about
better.
60 million euros.
To say 70-something million. Yeah, so I think this is why strategically the hospital decided a few years ago, there was a whole strategic planning going on, and the decision was to launch the research institute, so put a brand in all this research going on at Mass General. Many of our colleagues don't know that our benches are in the hospital, and they think because we are Harvard professor, they are in Longwood area, but they are not, they are in the hospital. And the brand was one thing, and we said we need to better promote our research, and this is how the Strategic Alliances team was creating, and is based, and this initiative, and is based in the Office of the Scientific Director. This is very new compared to what my colleagues from Chicago were describing. So what this whole Bridging Academia with Industry initiative reports to the scientific director of the Mass General Research Institute, Dr. Susan Slagenhout. So I report to her, and intentionally is in the hospital with researchers. And I run this initiative together with Pat Fortune, who is my colleague from the Innovation Office. This is our large tech transfer office. So he oversees all the business development and commercialization piece. So we built it together, and we said we need to work with our scientists to increase their interactions with industry and the connection to the ecosystem in Boston. And when I say industry, it's biotech, pharma, medical device.
So let's take an example. Next week, I tell you this patent application, I'd like an exclusive worldwide license on it. And I'd like to do a sponsored research agreement with the inventor. Between the time I tell that to you and the time we sign the final agreement, how long will it take?
Well, Philip, I cannot, depending what is we always start with the science. What is the science? So we have to figure out what do we want to do together. It comes to the relation, build a relation. And once we decide scientifically,
I tell you, we want to start a company in France. We want an exclusive license on the technology. We may give you some royalties and some warrants in the company. And if successful, you'll make some money, and we want a collaboration with the two top inventors in the form of sponsored research.
Well, I think we will always first work with you and understand what is the foundation of this collaboration. And I would not do it by myself. First, we will bring the investigators involved in, and I will bring my colleague, Pat Fortune, will be with me from the beginning on to design the collaboration.
You don't want to give me a number of weeks, right?
No,
in between 2 months and a year and a half. Where are we?
In between. Depending on so no, but it's very well taken. I mean, it really, we work on this also.
So what Gabriela and I before the roundtable said, if we succeed in the next 6 months to start a company together, this roundtable will be a success. We'll try.
See, this is what. Okay, so
but a second question is sponsored research. How much time your scientists or clinicians would be allowed to spend on the startup we'll have formed together?
I mean, I don't think it's a question of them being allowed. I think it's a question, of them deciding they would like to go into this.
But you have regulations, right? On maximum time.
No, because, for example, 1/3 of the physicians at Mass General are involved in research. They are running their labs. So they bring funding in for the time they spend in research, and this includes their salary for this time, and it includes their team salary and the project money. So there is a strong decision they have to make, how much time and what is the area. And for the rest of the time, they treat patients. So the PhDs are more, obviously full-time, and they then go into the academic track. But we, again, 2,000 principal investigators, and there are 4,000 research fellows and staff. We train every year 1,500 fellows at Mass General. So I think this is the order. So just not to leave this without a context, what I did here, I wanted to show you. So Mass General is an ecosystem by itself, and I will come back to this. But here is the ecosystem where we are in Boston. So what I did, you see this picture on the left on the 70s. This is Kendall Square for the ones familiar with the area. And this is how it was looking, and this is how it looks in 2019. And you have the key figures there. So 550, this is the to date biopharma companies in Kendall Square. You see the bridge there, over the Charles River. This is the Longfellow Bridge, and it goes from Kendall Square, and right on the other side, you have the Charles MGH stop, and this is where MGH is. So just to tell you, and I mentioned earlier, actually, when Jeff commented on what happened in Boston, this huge investment also by the state of Massachusetts, Massachusetts back in 2008 by the Governor Patrick. This investment of $1 billion in life sciences and the impact that had, of course, in our ecosystem, and this 20% now of our workforce in life sciences in Massachusetts, and also this 25 billion revenues this ecosystem brings every year. What I think is critical also, you see, well, I put there the number of colleges and universities. I think this is also key. And of course, the academic medical centers, we are one of them. So these are the most well-funded also NIH medical academic centers in the US. So we are in this ecosystem. Still, we decided we need to work on connecting with industry and making sure we truly believe that we need to get our innovation to patients in need, and for this we have to go through robust collaborations with biotechs and industry. So we think this is how we need to go. We will not manufacture a drug or a device. We need to collaborate, and we need to get there. So this is how this actually this initiative came, and this will answer Philip's question. If I have to draw a picture, this is what it is. You see the Longfellow Bridge is the one I showed you in the nice pictures, and the left side where the industry bubble is the Kendall Square, and the other side is really MGH on the other side of the bridge, and with the two pictures. So this was the initiative. I told you why. We thought we need to do a better job, and we need to make sure we can sustain this research enterprise and work on treating our patients and having research as a driver in order to do this. And, you know, increasing interactions with industry is a broad mission, and also promoting science is a broad mission. We built it in 4 pillars. I will mention 2 of them. So the first thing we did, and I will give an example, we said, you know, what are the major key questions our scientists are trying to solve, and why? So what are the key healthcare problems we need to solve in the future, in 3, 5, 10 years from now on? And we build teams around this. So this is what we call a solution-driven program approach. And we build the teams. We mixed up MDs and PhDs. We mixed up different stages of research, basic science, translation, development stages. We mixed, of course, device and drugs. We were agnostic. We said, we want the people tackling important problems in this field, and we want to make a consistent plan together with you.
Give us 2 specific examples of
this. So there are 6 of them. I choose the immuno-oncology one. In 4 years, we were able to build 6 of these programs, and these are, the first one were immuno-oncology, epigenetics with both a neurology and an oncology component. We build neuroinflammation in neurodegeneration. We build microbiome, rare diseases, and cardiometabolics. This, to give you a picture of the numbers, we work very closely now with 120 PIs involved in these programs. This goes across roughly 20 different departments and centers at Mass General. What is, we think, new, and this is the model we are piloting, each of these programs, when we bring our colleagues, investigators together, we first identify the key questions they think need to be addressed in the field, and then we develop a research plan with them. We look to the critical path, and what we make sure we always incorporate in the solution we are building, the biology understanding. This is key, and you know this, Philip, from the immune field. The biology, the technology, and the medicine. We very often, and you will see on the immuno-oncology project, at Mass General, we always start with the clinical observations our physicians make in clinic every day, and the samples they can provide us as researchers, and we work on these samples. We look for novel biomarkers. If there are clinical correlation, then we are able to go back to new preclinical models, look through to novel mechanism of actions, bring this back to the clinic. So these programs, these are cross-functional teams, and these programs, they push a solution to a well-defined problem, and they really go across the whole research activities at Mass General. We try to leverage all we do, so basic science, translational research, and clinical work. So I think this is the principle of these programs. At the end, I will talk about the challenges, but I will show you the examples here. I have one example. So I picked immuno-oncology one because I thought this was very relevant when you look to the discussions this morning. And actually, I just would like to echo Professor Friedman's comment this morning. So the majority of our patients, they don't respond still so nicely. So we need to do a lot of work to understand better what is going on. So this program, so it took us 3.5 years to build it. 17 investigators involved. You have there this, you have the immune cycle, because we wanted to see where we have expertise and where we can enter this cycle to better understand. And what I can tell you, so of course there is expertise everywhere. I don't want to say we can do it all by ourselves. We don't think. So we know where we need partners, because now we have a consistent plan. We have an amazing cancer center, of course, at Mass General, and 3 lead investigators very strongly involved from the clinical and basic science side. See the questions there. First, we work on this mechanism. We want to understand mechanism of treatment response and resistance. We don't think we know it all. And then with this observation and with samples, we work on this role of innate immune cells and processes. This is the second one, the second area. And the third, you have it there, the treatment-mediated autoimmune toxicities. All these questions, they were cited several times in the panel this morning, actually, and I know you know this very well. So the key here is start there with the clinical observation, with the samples, and go across, understand, and bring new idea, new mechanism with a potential for new treatments. So once we have a plan, we have a research plan, then we don't do it in a loop only. It's a research push, of course. Pat Fortune, my colleague from the Tech Transfer Office, is on board from the beginning on. We have 6 advisors from industry and ventures with us doing this, informing this planning we are doing, and then we bring industry. So we brought roughly 15 companies, both pharma and biotechs, and we want to approach the companies now with a big picture, what we think needs to be done because we treat these patients. And we want these companies to inform our program. We want to hear if these are the same problems they are tackled, and then see is there anything we can do together. And what is new, and this comes to your sponsor research agreement, Philip, this is not a one-off type of collaboration. We are looking through this model. We still do this, and we can do it. We would look to a longer term, 3 to 5 years, multi-lab, jointly manage and govern collaboration with a partner, because we really want to see an IND at the end. So this will be our commitment with a commercial partner. We want to see these treatments available for our patients.
How many drugs coming from this effort have entered regulatory preclinical development, and how many are likely to get an IND in the next 2 years?
So, Philip, I can certainly look for this precisely. What I can tell you at Mass General, active clinical trials today, there are 2,000 ongoing. What I can also tell you, last year we enrolled actually 3,000 new patients who got IO treatments. So I think this is a number. So, and we can.
But that's also including the trials that will be run in the hospital, coming and sponsored by a lot of companies. Right? So my question was, to be a success, this effort should translate into how many INDs in the next 5 years, would you say?
So we think
of drugs coming from these labs.
So for this different, so we think at a horizon of 2 to 3 years, what we are targeting, for example, 1 to 3 INDs, new INDs.
Okay, very good. So I can testify getting a license from this ecosystem works well, because we started a company in Paris called Holistic Medical with a Harvard, MIT, Brigham Hospital patent negotiated in 92 days with Christmas in between. So that was effective. So, Pasteur Institute almost as fast, Christian.
No.
You were
Okay. So
I know. So let's talk a minute about your policy towards patents. What do you tell scientists? You have an idea, you want to file a patent, let's get it done right away? Or do you tell them, well, we have to look at market potential, cost, additional results, and so on? What is your policy for
Okay, so I'm
filing
not the
patents?
best person to answer this, but I can answer it from the perspective of the principal investigators we are working with. So first, we go through this new mechanism. We go through this whole process, with the scientists. So we don't separate our business development specialists in the tech transfer, the transaction people, the IP colleagues from the science. So the scientists will go through this process. They have an idea. We will have to look. If we file a patent, why we file a patent. So we really try to fully integrate them into the thing.
Ultimately, who decides if a patent should be filed or not?
I think it's a joint decision. I think we need the science, and we heard this several times. We need to start with science, and we need very good science, because otherwise there's nothing to translate. And then we add the pieces. So we add, so how strong the IP would be, what would be the IP, and what would be the market, and what would be maybe what about health economics, who would reimburse it, and what about the regulatory path? Do we flesh out a full business plan? No, I don't think this is our job.
Right?
No, and we acknowledge this is not our job. But we want scientists to be part of it. Dosimetry is important because they are more involved at the beginning, but they stay on board later on. So I think this is how we try to approach it. There are challenges with this process, so I don't know how.
So immuno-oncology, give us a second example of
Sure.
major program.
So neuroinflammation in neurodegeneration, for example, we really think all these drug development that failed in this field. What about Alzheimer and all these inflammatory trigger diseases like multiple sclerosis, ALS? So we really think, based on the observations that our neurologists made, we think inflammation is a major factor. So what we do, we put the same program together, roughly 20 investigators, strong technology, because we need novel biomarkers, non-invasively. We need to detect early enough inflammation in the brain. And then we have, Alzheimer in a dish now proved. We can do in vitro, ex vivo work. What we think is that the whole philosophy of developing these drugs for this type of neurodegenerative diseases need to be rethought carefully, and we engage with potential partners, and we really hope we'll develop these new drugs. And
what about medical devices, interventional medicine, and the intersection between pharmaceuticals and medtech? What do you do there?
So actually medical devices, I think our technology piece encompasses all this, and you have several type of devices there. But we have new first all detection or diagnostic, a lot of diagnostic for example, the circulating tumor cell technology, and several technologies that we would have, or using the retina to look into the brain and to see if we have inflammation there. So a lot of technology, or we have photomedicine, many things.
So you talk about, of course, scientists, clinicians, not much about engineers. So are you bringing engineers a lot in this group?
Yeah, we would love to have more. We collaborate with MIT a lot. We also bring PhD students from abroad, also from Europe. No, they are an integral part of our research teams, and many of them train as engineers/technicians. You know this from Stanford in our labs, and very often they move on and they go to medical school. So they are. but we look for collaboration. We are a hospital. You know, this is what, I mean, I'm an engineer, of course, and I think this is sort of revolutionary to be now in a hospital and a Harvard medical professor. So this speaks to how novel this whole model is, and I hope we will be successful to show that this team science is the way to go.
On the clinical side, do you have internal teams, CRAs? 1 minute. Okay. Do you have CRAs on board? Do you have biostatisticians on board?
Yeah,
or?
yeah, we have a whole division of clinical research where we really look into this.
Okay. One last question. Do you speak German?
Well, yes, I did. Well, I started German as 3 years.
Because we can say we have a better chance in France to start companies with you because you speak fluent
I
French.
trained in Romania, Germany, and France. So I think it's, and I have citizenship now from three countries.
So how many companies would you like to get started between your hospital, Mass General, and French entrepreneurs?
Okay, I think
Let's set a goal for the next 5 years.
I mean, you know, the number we need in order to solve a problem. Can we cure cancer?
No, you don't answer the question.
No,
How many
but
companies do we get started this way in the next 5 years? Let's say 3 to 5?
Why not? Yeah.
3 to 5. Bon, merci beaucoup.
Okay.
I think Gabriella had a tough customer here with Philippe, but thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gabriella. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful round table to finish off these 2 days. I'm now going to call upon the chairman of France Biotech to come on stage and to close these wonderful 2 days.
Okay. So it's time to conclude. So this HT ID is come to an end. And before to thank you, every one of you, I would like to have a question. Who think that this event is a success? So push your Thank you very much. So I think really this event is a very big success for this first time. Thank you very much for your participation and commitment that has been reached its objective. Sorry, I'm troubled. So we have about 960 one-to-one meetings during these 2 days, about 600 participants. So it's a very good participant at this meeting. And to unite for the first time in Paris the most promising health actors, investors, and industrial was a real challenge. So that we have reason to. So it's good. I am convinced that 100 of meeting of one-to-one was useful for everyone. Thank you very much for the experts who share some information very useful for the community ecosystem. And thank you very much for sponsor. There is a supporter at this meeting. The list is long, and I think I will not name all of them. But without them, this meeting does not have not seen the light of day. So thank you very much. We really trust that this event will be the first of many more to come. Now, have a break.
Pas très bonne, hein, c'est ça.